for the public who may come back to view this video and the presentations at a later time. So we want to make sure that we're not speaking over each other and that we don't. Oh, I just got a message that we are live. The next instruction is something you're all familiar with, but I'll go through it again. If you would like to speak, make a comment, other than when you're called upon for a vote or a roll call, please use the raised hand feature. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that at this point, but in case you're not, if you're on a laptop, you click on participants and have your participant window open. Way down at the bottom, there is the tiniest little box with a hand in it. If your eyesight is like mine, it doesn't even look like a hand. It looks like a dot. but if you click on that button, you can raise your hand using that. If anybody has trouble finding it before we go live, please let us know.
And Nadine, this is Kirk, how does it apply to me? Do I just stay basically on and unmuted when I want to speak?
Yes, you are the exception to that rule. You and Audrey will stay unmuted throughout the entire meeting.
Or as
Everyone,
Good morning.
hi. So everybody, please try to log in with full audio and video access. This is another meeting where we're going to have a lot of graphs, numbers, figures that are going to be shown. Comprehension will be a little bit strained if you're not actually able to see the screen. So if you're just trying to call in, we would ask that you try to log in so that you can see the entire presentation as it's going by.
For a split second, I
No.
thought you were asking us to put our videos on, and I was going to tell you I am not as fancy as Chairman Dillard this morning, so I don't think video is what people want to see of me.
That was one of the instructions for today. I started with that. We are trying to increase our level of engagement with the public, so we are trying to use video, particularly for board members and for presenters. But if today's not your day, Director Holt, that's okay.
You know what, Nadine? I can make it my day. Give me 2 minutes so I can run to my upstairs and grab a jacket, and then I will turn on my video. So at least my face looks okay. I'll be right back.
Trust that we all completely understand this feeling, which is why I'm staying off camera.
I'll be right back.
And Nadine, just to clarify, and for anyone this is Leanne, for those listening, and we were looking to have at the minimum the presenters on camera. If board members, that's kind of optional this month, but I'm sort of just breaking us in slowly as we, want to try to, because this is going to be dragging on for a little while longer, making sure that we're just available, accessible, and it's a little more easier to communicate, I guess, is also to my hope. So.
It's much easier to communicate. You can see when people are having audio problems, like you can see people's lips moving, but you can't hear them. You can let them know that they're on mute, etc. You're just better connected to the viewership. So going back.
I'm going to go back on mute, Nadine, since I've proven my video and my sound works.
Okay, awesome. And so again, I mentioned this at the last board meeting, but I'll repeat it every month because it's a little odd. In light of the pandemic, there were some changes made to the Open Meetings Act that now require a roll call vote for every item when a virtual meeting of this kind is held, so that each member's vote is identified and recorded. And again, I'm mentioning it because it might seem a little silly on perfunctory matters, things that we used to handle via unanimous single voice vote. So just letting you know that that is something that we'll be doing. Number 7, when you're presenting, with the exception of Metra, our IT team is going to be handling the slides for you. Please just remember to indicate next slide when you want Jerry. I think Jerry's going to be handling the slides. When you want Jerry to advance to the next slide, that's going to be taken care of for you. Chairman, I did want you to know that the one exception is because of some videos that are in Metra's presentation, they will be handling their own slides. So there might be a very slight delay when we transition.
Okay.
The Metro's presentation, I know you're very, very good at speaking with the public when there are these sort of dead moments. So I'm just letting you know about that. Last but not least, if anybody's having any kind of a connectivity issue, it looks like everybody's in fine right now, but sometimes, you know, your Wi-Fi may get weird, or, you know, you may somehow accidentally disconnect yourself. If you have trouble getting back in, you can contact the member of the IT team who contacted you for one-on-one support. So you have that email address and that phone number. If you can't find that, not a problem. Send me a text, 312-504-6638. You all have that information that Audrey has provided to you. And we'll get you some help as soon as possible if anything happens to your connection. So let's do our usual free login roll call just to make sure that everybody's here. Even if I've already spoken with you, if you could just give me a quick shout, that would be awesome. Director Indalcio? Is that you clearing your throat, Director Indalcio? Director Indalcio may have said. Director Canty?
Here.
Hi. Director Carey, I know you're on.
Hello?
Director Colston, are you still with us?
I am here.
Awesome. Chairman Dillard, I know you're still here with us.
Yes, ma'am.
Director Fraga, are you on? Come back. Director Fuentes, I know that you are with us.
Sure.
Thank you. Director Gaithing. Director Groven, I think I saw you pop up on my screen.
Yeah, good morning.
Hi. We know Director Holt is here. Director Cotel, are you with us? Director Lewis.
Yes, Counselor.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. Glad to see that you're on. Your audio is working.
Yes.
Director Melvin, I think I saw you pop up as well. Director Melvin. Director Pang, we just spoke, so I know you're on. Director Ross, we spoke earlier, so I know you're on as well.
Yes, I am.
And Dr. Sagar, you're still with us?
Yes, good morning.
Awesome. Good morning. So now I'll move over to the service board attendance. Do we have President Carter? Not yet. Jeremy Fine, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, how are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
Hi. Tom McCone? Not yet. Mike Conley?
Yes, this is Mike Conley. I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well.
Great. Mr. Dowinski, are you with us? Tom Farmer? We don't have Tom yet. Mr. Donahue, we spoke earlier, so I know that you're logged in and have good audio.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. I know Dominic is on.
Yes.
And Reynaldo Dixon.
I am here, Nadine. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm glad you're here. All right, I'm going to go back on mute. I'm going to give us a couple minutes to get. Still have a few people missing, so please.
Just if I might jump in here, this is Audrey to the board members and so, you know, you will raise your hand if you have questions or comments throughout the meeting. Please allow me a little extra time. The list that I have to scroll through is getting longer by the participant. So I'll have to, you know, go through everybody, but rest assured, if you do raise your hand for a question or a comment, I will get to you. Will be left out of the discussion. Thank you.
Sorry, Audrey, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, we have a lot more participants than we normally do. So it's going to take Audrey a little bit of time because she's doing many different things behind the scenes. So give her a sec when you raise your hand to acknowledge you. You scroll through all the names in order to see who has been raised.
Doesn't that mean it's muted?
Yes. It's muted. No.
Director Frege, I think I hear your voice. How are you today?
Okay. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm glad you're on it with us and your audio seems to be working just fine.
We're on mute though. So what do I do? Take it on unmute?
You want to go on mute. Right now you're unmuted because I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Where are you going now?
And I see Director Gathing has joined us as well.
Thanks, Audrey. I was just about to ask.
Are you on the phone, Director?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. You. Yes, I'm on the phone.
Okay.
Dr. Gathing, are you able to see the slide that's up right now?
Does it say, well, yes, I can see the slide. And then I have another thing they asked me to go to multimedia viewer.
Okay, as long as you can see everything, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you.
And are you able to find the raise hand function on your mobile device?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, great. You're all set. Thank you. Do we have Director Cotel yet?
I'm on.
Oh, fabulous. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. In case you didn't hear the announcement earlier today, we are trying, if you're able and willing, to use our cameras today to be a little bit more connected with the public. So if you'd like to, and if you're prepared for that, if you would turn on your camera, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's Audrey again. One more thing. If someone from IT can just, now that we've got everybody on, just advise people about the multimedia pop-up that they're seeing, what they should or shouldn't do with it.
This is Jerry. So the multimedia viewer, that's where we'll show the closed captioning. If you don't need it, you can just close that panel.
Thank you.
Just want to do another voice check for President Carter.
Dr. Sagar, please mute.
How about Tom McCone?
Right now you're unmuted. Yes, you should always do the mute and unmuting.
Okay, good. Everybody's on mute. That's awesome. Do we have anyone here from CTA? Oh, I see Tom McCone. If you could give us a shout, let us know that that your audio is working. That would be great.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you. Hi.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Do we have anyone from Metra? Do we have Jim Derwinski or Tom Farmer?
Jim Derwinski checking in.
Hey, how are you?
Great for a Thursday.
Thursday, very early in the morning. We're glad to have you. Thanks for joining us. Would you like us to give a couple minutes for Tom to join us?
Yeah, that's good. And yeah, he's got an invite, so he should be joining. I can give him a text real quick.
Okay, thank you. Quick reminder to everyone that we are live on YouTube at this moment.
Hi, Nadine, it's Kirk. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chairman.
So for some reason, it kicked me out and I put myself back in.
Yeah, I thought I saw a little triangle pop up, a little warning sign showing that your connectivity might have been low.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. Anyway, it says my camera is used by another application. Make sure that your camera device integrated webcam isn't currently being used by another app. So I have no video, but you do have my audio.
Hmm.
Nadine, I have the same issue as well, living in Elsie.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me see if you're logged in more than once. That could be the issue. If you had to log in more than once, it may think that you're logged in twice.
Yeah, once I start video, it kicks me out of the whole program, and I have to re-sign this.
Well, look, the cameras obviously are not mandatory, so we're just happy to have you here and connected, able to hear and see the presentation.
All right, thank you.
Would you like me to begin with audio, and then when I get to Leanne's part of the meeting, I'll completely take myself out and try to put myself back in? How's that? To see if I can get my video.
Oh, we don't want to lose you, Chairman. I don't know if you want to do that. You're too important to the meeting.
All right. You tell me when I can begin.
Well, I see Tom Farmer has joined us, and I believe President Carter's also joined us. So I think we're good to go. I think we have full attendance.
Great. So good morning to all attending the RTA's virtual meeting of the Board of Directors. The governor's emergency declaration remains in force during the COVID-19 pandemic, and pursuant to his executive orders declaring a public health emergency and recent amendments to the Open Meetings Act, we continue to operate under the permission to conduct our meeting without physical attendance requirements. As head of this public body, I find it is not prudent or practical to hold an in-person meeting or to have staff or any other member of the board at our headquarters during the meeting. Now let's review the guidelines for the meeting. Keep your audio on mute as much as possible in order to minimize background noise, which may impede or impair the recording. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand. Audrey will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, lower your hand and unmute before speaking. When we get to voting, please raise your hand to make a motion or a second. Audrey will identify who is making the motion and second for the record. After she announces the motion and the second and lowers all hands. Are there any questions at this time?
No hands.
Okay. With that said, I'll now call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order, and I will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Director Andalcio?
Yeah.
Director Canty?
Here.
Director Carey? Here. Director Colson?
Here.
Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Here.
Director Gaving?
Here.
Director Groven?
Here.
Director Holt? Here. Director Cotel? Director Lewis?
Present.
Director Melvin?
Here.
Director Pang? Here. Director Ross?
Here.
Director Sager?
Here.
Chairman Dillard?
Here.
We have a quorum of 16 present with no absent. If I could remind everyone, if you are not speaking or called on to speak, please turn your microphones on mute. There seems to be some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Item 3A is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on October 15th of 2020. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve these minutes as submitted. Can I have a motion and a second?
Director Canty moves.
I'll second it. This is Frega.
Friggins. We have some people that are not muted. If you would please mute. There's quite a bit of background. Mr. Connolly, it looks like you are not muted. So I have a motion by Director Canty and a second by Director Frega.
Take the roll, please, Madam Secretary.
Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Aye.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Aye.
Director Gaving?
Aye.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel? Director Cotel? You have to unmute, please. Director Cotel, please unmute. I'll try back. Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
Director Cotel. Can you hear me? Unmute, please. I'm going to have to go with a no response, which means 15 ayes and 1 absent.
Great, and that will the minutes will be so approved. Thank you, everyone. Item 4 is the public comment segment of the meeting. We've asked the public to submit their comments via electronic mail. Any comments received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Audrey, did we have any comments submitted?
I did not receive any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is the executive director's report. Leanne Redden. Good morning, Leanne.
Morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me this morning. So welcome and thanks for joining us at today's, I think, very important board meeting. Annually, all 4 transit agencies collaborate to develop the proposed regional operating budget, the 2-year financial plan, and the 5-year capital program. So our 2021 proposal was posted on the RTA website on November 10, which began a public comment period that will include a virtual public hearing on December 3 and will culminate when the RTA board considers it for adoption at your December 17 board meeting. Just a quick reminder that the regional budget hearing that will be hosted by the RTA on December 3rd, it'll be at 5 p.m. and hosted via Zoom. It'll be fully open to the public. You can register for it at our website to get the link for that meeting and participate. I will also encourage board members to join. Audrey will do a follow-up with you later after this meeting today. And people can also comment to us, not just through the meeting, the Zoom meeting, but also via our website, via phone, and also regular mail. The service boards themselves have also collected public comments and held virtual public hearings on their respective budgets, which are easy to find from the RTA homepage at rtachicago.org. To comment on the proposal, you can also email communications@rtachicago.org. Next slide, please. As stated in the budget proposal introduction, this is anything but a normal year for our region's transit system and virtually every other transit agency across the country. That as we've all suffered dramatic decreases in ridership and revenues due to the unprecedented impacts of COVID-19. So here in Northeastern Illinois, the staff of CTA, Metra, and PACE have heroically kept transporting workers to hospitals, police and firehouses, grocery stores, and other essential workplaces. However, as of November 6, ridership is down 69% system-wide compared to 2019. Next slide, please. Continued operations have been made possible by the $1.4 billion from CARES Act monies, which passed back in March. As those funds run out in 2021, our transit system will face a potential shortfall of more than $500 million. The proposed 21 operating budget, the 2-year financial plan, and the 5-year capital program assumes further financial relief, and without which a reckoning will come sometime early 2021, when this budget would need to be revisited and probably will have to enact the service boards will have to enact painful service cuts. Due to decreased ridership, farebox revenues from all 3 service boards reached their low point in May, but was followed by some slow increases. Without additional federal relief for transit, farebox revenue will not likely rebound quickly enough in 21 to avoid potential painful service cuts. We will therefore continue working with our national association and our transit partners across the country to push for additional federal relief, and we're asking for $32 billion for transit nationwide. But that new relief remains much in doubt. In times like this, it's important for all levels of government to step up with additional support to sustain transit beyond the pandemic, because severe cuts will have negative effects not only on essential riders in the short term, but also for the region's longer term recovery. So next slide. In a moment, the service boards and the RTA will present details of our respective proposals. Overall, the 21 proposal for the regional budget totals 3.02 billion, a decrease of 157.4 million or 5% from the pre-COVID 21 plan. The proposed 5-year capital program totals $6.351 billion. As many of you probably have already noticed, the capital section of the 21 proposal is dramatically more detailed than in prior year budgets. This reflects several years of teamwork between the RTA and the service boards, with whom we have been collaborating to articulate and advance a regional transit strategy based on our Invest in Transit regional plan. And the significantly enhanced 21 through 25 capital program proposal is among the improvements cited in our framework for capital investments. And this week, we reached out to the civic groups who have provided comment on that framework back in October about the proposed capital program and how we're presenting it this year, and how we look forward to continuing to talk with them and other stakeholders as we execute our 3-step recovery strategy. So next slide. As a reminder, we're in the middle of step 1 in the RTA's 3-step strategy for COVID-19 recovery. Next, after adopting the 21 budget that reflects the realities of this current crisis, in step 2, we'll engage, we need to engage and actually execute that budget, but also make decisions as needed to sustain transit during this time of uncertainty. And our final step will be to plan boldly and strategically for long-term recovery, seeking to reinvent transit in our region with an outlook of 23 and beyond. Among our greatest challenges is to anticipate a variety of potential outcomes and plan carefully so riders, especially those most vulnerable who rely on transit, can continue to count on public transportation. Next slide. So as a transit system with 3 different but interdependent providers, we have collectively developed this proposed 21 operating budget, 2-year financial plan, and 5-year capital program to protect transit from the uncertainties of COVID-19, while also speaking frankly about the possible ramifications if additional funding doesn't emerge. This moment requires nothing less than bold thoughts and action. As a region, we must ensure that our transit system continues to serve its riders reliably, even in the absence of additional relief funding. And while weathering the difficult year ahead by anticipating, understanding, and confronting challenges of this deadly pandemic, we must also reinvent our transit system to ensure that it can adapt to the region's long-term future. So next slide. And finally, since our last meeting, state, local, and federal elections were held. So I want to provide a quick update on those things and how they impact our work. On Tuesday, several staff members from APTA, a national association, sat down with President-elect Biden's US DOT review team to discuss transit priorities for the new administration. These priorities include a passage of a second round of emergency relief funding for transit nationwide, as well as enactment of a long-term surface transportation reauthorization bill. Early indications are that a Biden administration would likely support emergency relief spending proposed by House Democrats over the past several months, and would likely be a proponent of a comprehensive infrastructure reauthorization package. However, the Republican-controlled Senate has recently rejected House Democrats' relief funding proposals, so all of that is still very much up in the air. As you're aware, Republicans control the Senate as of now, and Democrats would need to pick up 2 Georgia Senate seats on January 5th, on the January 5th runoff election, in order to take control of the Senate. And on the state level, the Illinois General Assembly had been scheduled to meet starting this Tuesday for a 2-week fall veto session. However, due to concerns about the increases in COVID cases statewide, that session was canceled. It is possible that the General Assembly will attempt to reconvene in early January prior to the new House and Senate being sworn in on the 13th. The General Assembly, when it does convene, it's going to have to address and take up a host of potential budgetary issues of its own. As you likely know, the graduated income tax proposal was defeated earlier this month. And the proposal would have amended the state's constitution to allow for the implementation of a graduated income tax structure. The Governor's Office of Management and Budget had estimated that an additional 1.3 billion of revenue would be made available in fiscal year 21 had that proposal passed. As a reminder, much like our region's transit system, the state is facing a major deficit in this year's budget. When the 2021 budget was passed last May, it contained a $5 billion shortfall. At that time, the legislature authorized the state to borrow up to $5 billion from federal relief reserve loan programs to address that deficit, but the state has not done so yet. It is anticipated that a federal relief bill for aid for state governments, if that does not materialize, the state would choose to address its revenue shortfalls for fiscal year 21 through a combination of some federal borrowing and state spending reductions. The governor's administration has already advised state agency directors to identify 5% of appropriated 21 spending to potentially hold in reserve in case budget cuts are needed. And one just quick final slide just to bring everybody onto the same page. Our state delinquency figures for this month. Through the end of October, the state owes the RTA 190.8 million in the combination of ASA, AFA, and PTF. The state is 4 to 5 months behind in those payments. And the year-to-date cost of, actually, guys, can you jump to the next slide? Sorry. Maybe, yeah, there we go. Thanks. And the year-to-date cost of short-term debt is 4.3 million. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Leanne. I have a feeling those delinquency numbers from the state will rise. Any questions from the board for the executive director?
I'm checking. One moment. It appears not. Oh, Tom Cotel, please lower your hand and unmute.
Audrey, I was experiencing some technical difficulty during the last vote. I'd like to go on record as being, as approving the minutes from the previous meeting.
So noted. I will update the vote count to 16 ayes.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks, Leanne. Just a postscript to Leanne's comments. I was delighted to see that the recently announced USDOT transition review team of President-elect Biden had so many familiar names associated with transit from around the country, importantly, including Phil Washington, who is the current CEO of LA Metro. Phil's a Chicago native. We all know him well. Dorval knows him well. And he's heading the team of advisors. And for me, what jumped out is that it indicates that the new administration prioritizes transit investment and understands, I think, the need of big cities. So I was happy to see that. As a former elected official, as Leanne talked about the changes in Washington and Springfield, I want to congratulate those individuals who won election at the local, state, and federal level. And I'm enthusiastically looking forward to working with them during these tough times. I'll continue my drumbeat with elected officials to make sure that they know how critical transit investment is to the social and economic recovery of this region and this nation. I was very happy yesterday that the Wall Street Journal printed a letter to the editor that I penned over the weekend. In fact, within about 5 minutes of hitting the submit key to talk about that the way to get President-elect Biden and Mitch McConnell and the Congress on the same page is to begin with infrastructure, because labor and business and Republicans, Democrats, rural areas, suburban areas, and cities all need infrastructure improvements. And within about 5 minutes of my submitting that, the Wall Street Journal's letter to the editor person called me and said, "That's an excellent letter. We're going to run that." And they ran it yesterday, which is good. So my hope is that the leaders at the federal level will come together and pass a much needed recovery bill for transit in the short term. But we also have to begin to work on a new federal reauthorization legislation to ensure the viability of transit well into the future, as our next three service board presenters, I'm sure, will agree. So item 6 are the presentations and budgets and discussion of the 2021 agency budgets for PACE, the CTA, Metra, and the RTA ourselves. And I'll turn it over to our outstanding financial guru and wizard of the RTA, B, to make opening remarks and call on the service boards. B, it's all yours.
Just a couple of comments. This is B. I wanted to thank the service boards, CTA, Metra, and PACE, their capital and their finance teams for, once again, a very collaborative process, especially in this very challenging times. Please keep in mind that, like our projections as well as our budgets, these are not forever budgets. These are not forever projections, because we know that this is a very, very much a changing environment, and we will come to the board as needed if we need to amend budgets or if we need to amend funding estimates. We have done our very best with our estimates and our Moody's and professional projections, but that's what they are. And the good news is that in 2020, sales tax projections are coming in higher than we expected, but certainly fair ridership, as you will hear from the various CTA, Metra, and PACE, have not come in where we had thought they would be. So with no further ado, let's turn it over to the service boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, B. Who's going first?
PACE. It will be PACE, please.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the board. I'm Rocky Donahue, the Executive Director of PACE, and hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. I had some technical difficulties yesterday, so hopefully those are cleared up from a presentation I did. I have a couple PACE members of the team here with me that I'd also like to introduce. Dominic Cuomo, our Chief Financial Officer, and Ronaldo Dixon, our Manager of our Budget Department, who quite honestly were the architects of the budget and who I have the utmost respect for, and can only say thank you to them and their teams. And in my 38 years here at PACE, this is quite honestly the hardest budget we've ever had to develop. And just as B said, it was so hard because there's so many unknowns. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know what ridership is going to be like. We don't know when there's going to be a vaccine. We don't know if there's going to be another round of stimulus money. And as a result, this is our best guess as of today. But as B said, we also are taking this as being very fluid. I wouldn't be surprised if we were bringing to the RTA board and our own board quarterly, if not monthly, budget amendments based on real-time data. I will tell you, my communications team is probably going to be very angry at me because they wrote a like 14-page very excellent script for me to read off of, and I'm going to kind of veer from that and just really have a conversation with all of you. So if this doesn't go well, it's because I screwed up, because our communications team quite honestly did an amazing job with this. As everybody knows, these are crazy, unusual times, unprecedented times, stressful times. You pick the adjective and it applies. And truth is, we're all making this playbook up as we go along. I've been at PACE 38 years. I can't look at my own institutional knowledge or some of our other long-term managers and say, hey, what did we do in 1985 when this occurred? Can't call colleagues from New York or LA or Texas and say, hey, when this happened to you a couple of years ago, what did you do? So we're making the playbook up as we go along. And I have to give a really big thank you, Chairman Dillard, to you and the board for your leadership during all of this. And a real big thanks to Leanne and the RTA staff. They have been absolutely tremendous in communicating with us, trying to help us, working with us. Any issue we brought to them, they've taken it very seriously and have acknowledged it. And I want to thank you and your team for all you've done. What I can tell you what this pandemic has reinforced, one of the things to me is the fact that PACE is a vital service that provides crucial transportation access for the communities we serve. It includes also transportation for many essential workers traveling to and from their places of employment. Our funding streams have been devastated as a result of this. We have increased costs now on spending on safety and sanitation. We're cleaning like we never have before. Initially, we were spending approximately $20,000 a day just on PPE and additional cleanings. It's subsided a little bit, but we're estimating it's going to cost us anywhere between an additional $3 to $5 million just to do what I would call the sanitation and the safety aspects of COVID-19. When the pandemic began in the spring, our ridership dropped to about 30% of what we were carrying pre-COVID. In the summer and fall, we clawed our way back to where we were carrying about 50% of our ridership. And quite honestly, the last 2 weeks, that's dipped to about 45% because of the recent resurgence and the mitigation efforts. So we've recovered a little bit, but we're still not there. So in order to balance our budget, we needed to make some very difficult choices for 20 and 2021. And our proposed budget, which I'll get to here in a little bit, is balanced without fare increases. But I would like to remind you, we're calling it a status quo budget. And by status quo, it includes service suspensions on 73 routes, as well as service modifications on another 25 routes that we put in place since May of this past year. 98 routes we either outright suspended completely or have modified, and we're saying by status quo, those will stay in effect. Obviously, if things get better, the economy improves, ridership demand comes back, we get a vaccine widely distributed, our hope is to bring that service back. Like all of you, we're public servants. We're in the business of providing public transportation. We get no joy in having to have to reduce service, but because of the daunting financial challenges we were facing, and quite honestly, the demand for the service, and also we had to repurpose, for lack of better term, strategically deploy our equipment in order to have social distance. We still have routes that carry 4,000 to 5,000 people a day. Route 352 in South Cook County on Halstead still carries almost 5,000 people a day. And how do you social distance with that many people getting on the bus? So we had to free up equipment to put shadow buses or additional equipment out, which is also a cost. Instead of having maybe 30, 40 people on the bus, we're now running 3 buses and they each have 15 people on it. But the big thing is our budget is balanced because we're utilizing federal CARES funding. And I cannot stress enough, without another round of federal assistance, we face serious budget challenges at the end of 2021 and into 2022 and beyond. So can we go to the first slide, please? And I'll get into the budget. So before we get to 21, I'd like to kind of give you a little overview about 2020. And the numbers I'd like you to pay attention to is what's in red down at the bottom where it says net funding available. When this pandemic started, we thought, quite honestly, we were going to have an $83 million budget hole in 2020. And that's with the amended budget. As you can see, our operating revenue, which is primarily fares, dropped significantly. Our expenses basically stayed the same at that point in time. We didn't know what we were going to be doing with service or what additional costs we were going to have. So our funding requirement due to the drop in fares increased, but then public funding, we estimated sales tax was going to decrease, and we thought we were going to need $83 million. As of right now, our estimate is we're only going to need to use $31 million of CARES money. All right, that sounds positive. It's still $31 million hole in our budget, which is 15% of our basically our total operating expenses. But how did we get that 83 to 31? Well, as you can see to the far right column, we've already taken corrective action. As B mentioned, our operating revenue, our fare revenue is actually a little bit higher than we thought it was because our ridership, quite honestly, has done better than we thought it has. And it gets back to my point of we're an essential service that, quite honestly, a lot of our ridership don't have other options. And without us, they don't get to work. They don't get to the Walgreens to get their prescription filled, or they're a person with a disability who can't get to the doctor's office, or quite honestly, just partake in life like all of us take on. So our ridership has done better than we thought a little bit. And the big side is we've really tightened our belt on the operating side. As I mentioned, we have suspended service on 73 routes and modified service on 25 other routes. We have instituted a hiring freeze on the administrative side of the house where we are already down 40 vacancies, which to give you a perspective is we have 225 people in our administrative office in Arlington Heights. So we are already have tightened our belt by 20% on that side of the house. And then there have been other savings with fuel, not having as many service on the street, and the cost of fuel is down. So the big drivers were on the expense side, service, labor, and fuel. It saved us about $19 million. So we only really need to use $31 million of CARES funding for 2020. Can we go to the next slide really quick? This is our proposal for 2021, which we're calling a status quo budget. And as you look at the numbers, and I know there's a lot there and it's hard to absorb, it's pretty status quo to what we're doing right now. What I want to point out to you is in the third column, or the second column, 2021 budget, net funding available. The bad news is we have almost a $55 million deficit. $55 million deficit. And that is primarily on the revenue side of the house. We've worked really hard to control what we can control, our expenses. Ridership is down, so our fare box revenue is down, and sales tax is down. Even though it's being mentioned it's doing better than we anticipated, it is still down from where it was pre-COVID. $55 million is 23% of my entire budget, $240 million budget. So the bad news, $55 million hole. The good news is because we've tightened our belts, we have CARES funding, which will plug that hole. And we believe we have enough CARES funding to get us through most of 2021, if not all of 2021. But our real problem comes into the third column, 22 plan, and fourth column, 23 plan, where you see that net funding available grows from $54 million to 56 and then to $60 million. And we don't have CARES funding to fill the hole. And so the good news is, yes, we have CARES money for 21. The bad news is a year from now, without anything changing, meaning not additional stimulus money from the feds, the economy doesn't get better, ridership doesn't grow, we're staring at a big cliff. $60 million is now 25% of our entire suburban service budget. And the truth is, and I'm going to steal what Dorval has taught me, is I really only have two levers to pull to address that $60 million hole. We do it on the revenue side. And we don't have the ability to raise taxes. So the only really thing we can do on the revenue side is fares. And the truth is, we wouldn't be able to raise our fares enough to cover a $60 million hole. To give you an idea, we would have to raise our fares to approximately $8 each time someone boarded a bus, which is just unrealistic, unaffordable. Nobody would do it. And if we did that, no one would ride the bus, and we wouldn't get to the number we need to get to. So the really only lever I have to reduce the $60 million hole without additional federal funding until the economy recovers is on the expense side, which is service and labor. And to give you a little perspective, I mentioned we've already reduced 73 routes and modified another 25. Those 98 routes saved us $19 million. But I'm facing here a $60 million hole. So we have some huge challenges. My board has said, hey, we're not going to wake up a year from now and look at $60 million. So you need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We're going to hope, and we're going to work really hard to get another round of federal stimulus money, but we need you to bring some potential budget balancing actions to us throughout the year to make that $60 million potentially be a little more manageable if the economy doesn't recover, if ridership doesn't come back, and there isn't more stimulus money. So we'll develop plans which will tighten our belt across all lines of our agency. We'll reduce administrative costs. We'll look at potential service reductions and potential fare increases. Can we go to the next slide, please? The ADA paratransit budget, the first column is in 2020. And then you can see how we're doing. Our operating revenue is way down on ADA as well, because we're carrying about 45% of what we were carrying pre-pandemic. Our operating expenses are a little lower, but not equal to where they should be based on the ridership declines, because out of safety, one of the things we implemented from the very beginning of this pandemic is we tried to turn all of the rides on ADA into single rides. And that goes against every core of what we do in public transit, of trying to group trips and make the service more efficient. And we went to single rides out of the safety for our passengers. We didn't want to have them sharing rides in a close vehicle. Most of the ADA passengers are some of our most vulnerable citizens. They're elderly with potentially underlying conditions due to their disabilities. And we didn't want to put our own operators more in danger and exposed with having group trips. So that's kept our costs higher than you would expect based on the number of riders. And public funding is down. Quite honestly, we have a $31 million shortfall in 2020. The good news is we, with RTA's leadership over the last honestly 5 years, have had positive budget variances on ADA, and we've been able to build up what I'll call a rainy day account in the ADA paratransit fund of about $40 million that is going to offset that $31 million for 2020. The good news for 2021 is through RTA's work and with our staff, we are proposing no fare increase, and we believe there will be enough funding to cover our anticipated costs of roughly $165 million for 2021. What I'd also like to point out, though, and we've been working very closely with the RTA and the other service boards, as well as members of the disability community, and we've engaged in an ADA paratransit study that RTA has taken the lead on this past year to look at ways of making the system more efficient, look at ways of enhancing customer experience without raising costs. And it is our hope we can roll out a couple pilots in 2021, which we believe will also help us be more efficient on the ADA side of the house as well. If we can get to the next slide. So what this pandemic, like I said, though, is we're not going to allow the challenges of 2020 to darken our vision of PACE's future. The capital budget we're presenting today shows we're still moving forward with several important projects. We want to thank the RTA again in the state and the federal government for their funding support to allow these exciting projects to move forward. Our capital program for 2021 is estimated at a very robust $106 billion. Much of that funding comes from the multi-year Rebuild Illinois package. And thanks to the Illinois General Assembly, that 2019 legislation will allow PACE to fund buses and facilities over the next few years. Some of those will include a new multi-purpose facility in Markham, which will consolidate our customer relations, our bus acceptance, central maintenance, and our South Division bus garage. We hope to have that project bid this year with completion by the summer of 2022. We're also building facilities in Wheeling, which will be a all compressed natural gas facility, which will take over for our aging garage in Des Plaines. We're building a new facility in Plainfield, which will take over for our aging facility in Joliet, and also allow us to enhance our I-55 bus on shoulder. And there's a whole host of other exciting projects on that. And what I also want to make sure that you're aware of is, because you get a lot of questions, well, now that COVID's here, how do you know you need all these projects? And how do you know you're moving in the right direction? About 18 months ago, we engaged in a strategic planning effort called Driving Innovation. And quite honestly, our hope was to have that out in the spring of 2020 and start releasing it for public comment and getting feedback. And obviously COVID hit, and what it did is we brought Driving Innovation back into house, and we've continued to work on it and revised it based on what we believe the world may look like when we get to the other side of COVID. And we believe it's going to be a bright future for PACE and for public transit. As Chairman Dillard said, we also believe we are part of the solution, and we're part of what's going to make our area and our region strong, and we need to be here and we need to plan for it. And these projects that we're proposing are critically important to ensuring that we're here when the public is ready to come back. If we can go to the next slide, please. Really quickly, we are anticipating to spend about $20 million over the next 5 years on improvements to ADA, and most of these are technology improvements, upgrades to the scheduling system. Best way to describe it, if any of you take Uber trips now and you can see when your vehicle is coming, customers are going to be able to do that on their computer, their smartphone, their iPads. They're literally going to see their vehicle on its way to coming to pick them up. And we're going to be upgrading a number of transfer locations throughout the region. And so we're planning to spend $20 million to upgrade improvements on ADA capital. Then the last slide I have for you, and what I have here are the images you see here are just some of the people who keep our region moving. These are PACE's frontline employees. They're out there every day making sure our passengers have the critical access they need to essential jobs, medical care, necessities, and they're truly heroes, moving heroes. And I can't thank those employees enough. I've never been prouder in my 38 years of PACE. I've never been prouder of my employees. I tell everybody I have the easy job, and my job's easy because of the men and women that you see on your screen, and all 1,800 PACE employees, be it those that are out in the road every day or those that are quite honestly still telecommuting from home, are working really hard to ensure those 50,000 people that get on our buses every day have that critical access to jobs, medical care, essential services like the grocery store. As we enter the winter months and navigate through the current surge in COVID-19, our top priority is to keep our passengers and our personnel safe. We move forward with the guidance of the 3 principles we established back in March, which is safety, service, and transparency. Our vehicles are clean, our service is safe, and we'll continue to communicate openly and honestly with the people we serve. I thank you for the time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone may have, or I don't know if you wanted us to wait till everybody got done and do questions then, but I thank you for this opportunity.
Any questions or comments from the board? Or B, you want to add anything?
Let me take a quick scroll.
Okay.
I am not seeing, oh. Carrie, if you'd lower your hand and unmute.
All right. Rocky, thank you very much. I think it was a great presentation, and really happy to hear some things, cutbacks on the administrative. I'm sure all that's quite painful, but you've taken this obviously very seriously and have done what you need to do. I guess my one question is, you've suspended 73 routes and modified 25, and you may have to do more depending on what happens in 2021 and the years beyond. What's been your process in the decision making about which routes to suspend and which to affect, and how have you communicated that to your customers?
Thank you, Director Carey. That's a great question. Quite honestly, a lot of these routes we suspended, I use this term, and I hope you'll understand what I mean by it. The decision was quite honestly made for us. When Metro reduced some of their service, there was no need to run, quite honestly, Metro feeder buses to meet trains that weren't running anymore. When schools went all virtual, a lot of our school tripper service, there was no need to run to schools that quite honestly weren't open anymore. So those were when I say easy, it's never easy to take service off the street, but those decisions were kind of made for us. The others were a combination of low ridership, but also trying to ensure there was at least a regional footprint that even if we reduce that route, there would potentially, hopefully, be another option. It may not be the most convenient option. It may mean you have to walk a little bit farther to catch a different bus, or you'd wait a little bit longer. But our goal was we were going to try to minimize the impact on the least amount of people as we could. So those were the real drivers of how we did that. I can't thank my planning team enough, quite honestly, to suspend 73 routes and modify another 25 under normal circumstances. Even if you could do it at all without the community uproar and the political realities, would have taken 5 to 6 years, and they literally did it in 5 weeks. How we communicated that with passengers was a whole host of ways. Our website, we have what we call text blasts, and people sign up to get messages. We tried to use the free media and news services. Leanne talked about her COVID-19 updates, and we got help from RTA and your forms of communication. And so we did the traditional type of ways. The good news, and this isn't good, but I guess what made it easier is a lot of people weren't riding the bus because they were either, like I said, school was closed, they weren't commuting downtown because they were telecommuting, so they weren't riding the bus at the time, and so it wasn't where it became a shock of one day they were on, one day where they were off. But there were some people obviously negatively affected by it. And those are always the hard ones to deal with.
Thank you.
Director Melvin has a question. If you would lower your hand and unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to, Rocky, I just wanted to commend you for a really excellent report. I mean, we're all thinking about all of these things, but in your report, you did a really good job of sort of juxtaposing the needs of the different actors in the process and the desires and also describing the hardships, and then to come out with optimism and determination on top of it is really quite good. So thank you. A series of very, very tough choices. Thank you for such a clear report that really, didn't just touch on the numbers, but also touched on the human aspect of it. So thank you. Just want to say I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. The thanks go to, like I said, the 1,800 employees every day at Pace. I have the easy part. And the truth is, if you like the report, it's because they did a great job preparing me. And if it didn't meet your expectations, it's because I didn't provide the right leadership or didn't communicate it very well. But thank you for the kind words.
Raise your hand and unmute. Unmute, please.
Rocky, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that heartfelt, hopeful report that you provided. And I trust that that's going to be the case as we go through the reports of all the service boards. But I truly appreciate your humble approach and want to, on behalf of myself as a member of the RTA board, to extend my sincere, true appreciation to the many employees that you have in the PACE system. There's no question about the fact that the single most difficult thing for a public servant to do is to make the heart-wrenching decision to reduce services. And you all have had to go through that. And I know that those have been difficult. And I appreciate your individual and collective leadership in that regard. I guess my question is, from your perspective, and this is an unfair question, I want to say that up front, but in your perspective, having to make these decisions, what are you perceiving to be the public response to these difficult choices that you've made? How do you believe that the general public who relies upon transit has received the difficult choices?
It's a great question. And first off, Director Sager, thank you for the kind words and thanks for recognizing the PACE employees. Like all of our systems employees at CTA, Metra, they all are working really hard, and I appreciate that you recognize that. To your question, I guess the best way I can answer that is we held budget hearings like all the service boards did, and part of those budget hearings had to say, hey, we're continuing the suspension of these 73 routes and 25 modifications. And we received, and I'm off of my memory, I think I'm in the ballpark, we received roughly 120 individual comments during that public hearing, 120. Now, 120, is that a lot in a region that has 8 million people? I don't know. But the largest amount of public outcry we ever received at a budget hearing prior to this was our 2008 doomsday budget, if any of you remember that, when the last really financial impact, and we didn't even have half that many people. So obviously these services are very important to the people who need them. And the one thing about PACE riders they're much more dependent on PACE than our sister agencies. And that's just the reality of the makeup of our rider. And those that have to ride the bus in the suburbs, they're not doing it because it's cool or it's sexy or it's fun. They're doing it because they have no other option. And this is how they get to work, be it at UPS or Amazon, or how they get to, a senior citizen gets to the pharmacy to get their prescription filled. Or a person with a disability just is able to participate in all the things we take for granted being part of the community. And if we're not there for them, that community gets shut out and that door closes on them. So it's very painful for them. I think the reality is people understand this pandemic has had a very traumatic effect on transit, and they get it, but they're hopeful, just as I am, that we'll get a vaccine widely distributed. We'll get confidence to come back to the system. We'll get the economy improved, and we'll bring the vast majority of these services back online. But so yeah, it's painful.
Anything else, Director Sagar?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Rocky.
Thank you.
Next, we have Director Lewis. If you would lower your hand and unmute.
Great, thank you. Rocky, first of all, let me join my fellow directors in terms of saying that was an excellent presentation. I think it brought to light a lot of the salient issues that you're facing at PACE in terms of trying to reconcile what almost amounts to Sophie's choice, if you will, in terms of, revenue versus expenses. My question is, I know there have been a lot of initiatives where PACE was the connecting link, job deserts, if you will, where you have workers who really needed desperately to get from one area of Chicagoland to where the jobs and employment might be in other areas of Chicagoland. How are those initiatives faring under the reductions that you have? Are those taking a priority, or are they being deferred until after this pandemic? Because that was a very important part of trying to connect people with jobs and resources. So just be interested in your response on that.
Again, thank you, Director. And a lot of those, just as you pointed out, were the hard choice was, quite honestly, we kept most of those services still operating and running just because of what you said. It's connecting people who the economic opportunities, for whatever reason, don't exist where they're at, and we're their only way to get to work. Be it we run. This pandemic, though, had some, I don't know, good things, if that's the right term. Is it related to some PACE services? Amazon, UPS, were hiring people. They couldn't get enough people. And all of a sudden, we were getting where we used to get maybe 40 people a day wanting to take out of Harvey our buses to Amazon and Joliet. 100 people were showing up. And we had to put extra service out. And same thing from the CTA 95th Street, where we would be collecting riders to go to UPS and Hodgkins. We were having to put 2 and 3 buses out so those individuals would be able to get to work. Part of our capital program, I talked about it, and I mentioned this project specifically. We're working with the tollway as they widen and reconstruct the central tri-state from 95th Street to Rosemont. And part of it is they're going to allow us to put in a flex lane, a bus only lane. And the idea is, again, to get a skilled workforce up to locations where there's more job opportunities. So we're still moving those forward because, I believe that this is eventually going to be behind us. Our region is going to recover. As Chairman Dillard has said, we're part of the solution, and we're part of what allows Chicago to be so economically viable. And we're going to need to be there when these opportunities come around. So we have every intent to continue to do that, and we're preparing for it. We kind of view this as more of a speed bump than a long-term reality.
Thank you.
And then now we have Director Ross. I think he might be the last of our board with questions. If you would unmute, thank you.
Okay, I echo the sentiments of my fellow board members with regard to the quality of your presentation. I actually have 2 questions. Of the 98 routes that you either suspended or modified, what percentage of total number of routes you offer is that?
It's a great question. We offer, pre the pandemic, we had basically 220 routes. So it was almost not quite 50% of our entire system. What's interesting though is it's even though we offer 220 routes, our top 25 routes account for 50% of our ridership though. So we have a number of routes, but it like I said earlier, a lot of these were chosen to minimize impact on ridership.
And so that leads to my second question, actually feeds into it nicely. And that is, we can assume that some of those 98 routes were among your top producers and not necessarily cut because of low ridership, at least not low ridership prior to the pandemic. Would that be correct?
Yeah, there is no real magical formula, and I think Jim and Dorval would agree. I think they would, is that there's a lot of factors that play into when you have to look at service reductions, and it's not just ridership, it's also connectivity, it's regional connectivity. There's also the political realities. There's also Title VI implications and all sorts of issues that have to play into it. The short answer is yes, it wasn't necessarily all the worst routes, and there were some routes that were reduced, quite honestly, because you had to try to be as fair but ensure there was still that regional connectivity.
Thank you.
Okay, one quick look. I see no further questions from the board for PACE. Thank you, Rocky. Next up, I believe, is the CTA and President Dorval Carter. If you would please unmute yourself.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard. Thank you, and obviously the ladies and gentlemen of the board. Thank you for having CTA at your meeting today. We look forward to talking through with you our budget and also some of the challenges that we've been facing. I have to tell you that it's kind of hard to follow Rocky because he certainly laid out a compelling case for what all of us are facing here in the region. But I'll try to focus in on what it's been for CTA. Although I think thematically, you're going to hear a lot of the same things from us that you heard from PACE, and I suspect that you will hear from Metra. Joining me today are Jeremy Fine, my Chief Financial Officer, Mike Connolly, my Chief Planning Officer, and Tom McComb, my Chief Administrative Officer. I'm going to give some introductory remarks, and then I will turn it over to Jeremy to walk through the details of our budget, and Mike Connolly to give you a better understanding of what's been going on with our ridership and how we've been trying to manage that. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has created an unprecedented level of challenges for transit agencies across the country. But it is also made clear that the bus and rail service that CTA provides along with Metra and PACE every day are absolutely essential to Chicago and suburban communities that we all serve. Over the last 7 months, CTA has seen an unprecedented loss of ridership and revenue, including a precipitous drop in ridership at the beginning of the pandemic that was as high as 80% of normal system-wide. We also experienced financial losses of over $1 million per day. And as a result of that, our 2020 revenues were down approximately $565 million. However, and this is really important because it explains a lot of how we've approached our particular service situation, even at our lowest point, we still carried more than 250,000 people each day. And even now, we are carrying almost 500,000 people a day, which represents about 90% of the public transit ridership in the region. To put that in perspective, we normally would carry 1.5 million people a day. But even at 500,000, we are carrying what would be considered a good day in a normal year for well over 90% of the transit systems in this country. Our surveys have indicated that many of the people who are riding CTA are medical personnel, emergency responders, and other essential workers who are dependent on CJ to make their necessary trips. And it has been our desire to focus on providing safe and affordable transit service for these essential workers as we continue to provide normal service to help promote social distancing aboard our vehicles. I think it's important for me to point this out. There's been a lot of questions about why CTA has run normal service. One of the reasons we run normal service is that we are carrying a lot of people. And not only are we carrying a lot of people, but we are carrying them in an environment where we are trying to maximize the social distancing that they have to use to take CTA safely throughout our system. In order to do that, especially given the capacity limits that we put in place based on guidance that we got from local and state health officials, we basically had to run full service. And as we'll explain to you when we go through our presentation, that service wasn't the same throughout the entire city. There are certain areas of the city that certainly saw a lesser decline in ridership than others. And not surprising, those areas of the city tended to be those areas that serve minority and low-income communities, which sort of reemphasizes the point that you just heard Rocky make about the people who use public transit and the needs and dependency that they have on public transit as a vital lifeline to carry out their everyday essential duties. Our 2021 proposed spending plan is unlike any other that I have ever experienced in my entire career. For all the same reasons that Rocky laid out, I don't need to repeat them. We are in unprecedented territory here, and it is a large part dependent upon receiving additional federal funds. It is an operating budget of $1.64 billion, but it also anticipates a projected shortfall of approximately $375 million as a direct result of the impacts of the pandemic. Now, I've been around a while, and I'm sure for those of you who have been around a while, you can remember prior what we would call doomsday budget for CTA. Just to put this in context for you, in the previous doomsday budgets that I ever had to be a part of, the budget deficit that we were talking about was somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million, maybe a little bit more. I have never in my entire career seen a budget deficit the size of what we're talking about for next year. This is Armageddon type stuff. It's beyond doomsday. It's unsustainable, which is why we need to get the federal relief necessary to keep our system running. Fortunately, Congress is considering a new emergency relief bill that includes public transit as part of the additional COVID-19 relief. And I am optimistic that Congress will once again be supportive of our industry in whatever emergency relief bill ultimately gets passed. As Leanne indicated, we are also working very closely with our transit partners and elected officials to ensure that transit continues to receive the support that it desperately needs. Unfortunately, though, we must also consider our future in the absence of that funding, which will include hard but potentially necessary decisions. These decisions will undoubtedly include service adjustments and result in significant employee layoffs. Despite these issues, we continue to put our customers and employees first. And I also want to make a note of how much appreciation I have for our frontline employees who have continued to work during this pandemic in spite of the personal concerns that they've had to their own health and safety. CTA and our workforce has been devastated by this pandemic just like everybody else. And in spite of that, they continue to come to work every day, and they continue to provide the services that we know are vital to keeping the city and this region operating. Their sacrifice, their dedication, and their commitment to public service should be applauded and rewarded for everything that they have done. I personally am very proud of the work that they have done and acknowledge the fact that if it weren't for their hard work, we would not be in a position to provide anywhere near the level of service that we are continuing to provide today. I want to thank the board in advance for your continued support and partnership as we have navigated through one of the most challenging times in the history of public transit. Leanne Redden and her staff have been unbelievably supportive and cooperative as we've tried to find solutions to things that none of us ever thought we would have to figure out in our lifetime. As Rocky indicated, we are sort of building the plane as we fly it. And that's not easy. It's not easy for anyone who's involved in this. And I hope and expect to have a continued level of support from RTA staff, as well as all of you as members of the board, as we continue to navigate our way through these difficult times. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Fine to walk you through the details of our budget. And after he completes his presentation along with Mike Connolly, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Jeremy?
Thank you, President Carter. I'm Jeremy Fine, the CTA's Chief Financial Officer. And as Dorval mentioned, we're presenting an operating budget of $1.645 billion. The proposed budget is dependent upon additional federal stimulus funding due to the shortfalls in revenue that we saw on both system-generated revenues as well as public funding. It's also critical to continue to deliver public transit to ensure that there's a seamless economic recovery, because again, we want to see a quick recovery and transit must be there immediately to allow that recovery to happen. The CTA continues to deliver critical normal service despite the impact that we've seen on ridership and revenue. And again, this is allowing us to continue to deliver service to essential service workers and to customers that need to get to those essential services. We continue to tighten our belts as we have over the last 5 to 10 years to derive efficiencies on various budget line items in the 2021 budget. But just to put a finer point on that, we've been able to achieve over $170 million of budgetary savings over the last 5 years and over $330 million over the last 10 years. We continue to operate within our budgeted expense levels through the pandemic. In fact, we expect to end 2020 with a slight positive variance on our expenses. We do see a slight increase in 2021 due to various factors, including COVID-related costs, as well as contractual wage increases, pension increases, vehicles coming off of warranty. But we will continue to look for efficiencies to continue to control costs as we move through 2021, as we have in prior years. Next page, please. This is if you can go back one page. This is a brief overview of the 2020 budget versus the forecast. Again, we expect here, as you can see in the second column at the bottom, we expect to have a deficit of about $550 million in 2020, which is again driven by the impacts from COVID-19. But again, the CARES funding that we received, of which we received a historic allocation from the federal government with support on both sides of the aisle because of the integral and essential service that public transit provides, we were able to attain that $817 million. We expect to use, again, about $550 million of that this year with a carryover into 2021. CTA's forecasted revenues are about $565 million unfavorable to the 2020 budget. That's driven by both lagging revenues on the system-generated revenues from fares, as well as public funding. It's important to note, though, that fare revenue is lagging budget almost $400 million of that $565 million total. While cities and states and other governmental entities wrestle with the public funding type shortfalls that we also see, we have a highly economically sensitive revenue stream, both on our public funding, but particularly on the fare revenues. So again, we're seeing fare revenues down in 2020 and 2021, almost 60% off of 2019 levels. Public funding is down about 20%. So you're seeing, again, the impact on fares in particular being multiples of that of public funding. CTA's expenses, again, as I mentioned, we've done a very good job with the help of the departments to control our expenses, and we expect to see a favorability at the end of 2020. This is, quite remarkable based on what you're seeing in public transit agencies around the country, where you're seeing exploding operating expenses due to ramping up of cleaning procedures. Because CTA already had, best-in-class cleaning procedures, we've not seen those explosive costs that have eaten up a lot of that CARES funding, if not in whole, in major part in 2020 for a lot of transit agencies around the country. Next page, please. With regard to our revenues and expenses, again, our revenues are diverse, but all economically sensitive. We received $817 million in CARES funding, which will be exhausted in the 2021 budget and calendar year. That helps us close a portion of the gap that we were seeing, but we still, as President Carter mentioned, have a gap of about $372 million, which again is reliant upon future budget balancing actions to close that gap. In addition, we also may see additional state cuts. It's important to note that since 2015, we've seen various cuts implemented by the state to our various funding streams to the tune of about $38 million a year. And that comes in the form of haircuts on sales tax, PTF, and the reduced fare reimbursement. And the latter two, 80% of that is borne by CTA. And again, we may see additional cuts. Those are not included in our budget gap because those have not materialized. But again, due to the fair tax not passing, there may be additional haircuts imposed by the state. With regard to our expenses, again, as Rocky had mentioned, with regard to PACE, it's hard to bend our expense curve dramatically without impacting service levels. Again, we've done a great job of doing belt tightening at CTA. Again, about $170 million over the last 5 years. We'll continue to look for those types of opportunities as we move forward. But again, most of our expenses are directly tied to service levels, whether it's through labor or whether it's through our fuel and power or materials that, again, is based on service levels. It is important to note, though, that only 5% of our overall budget is related to administrative labor. That is very lean. If you look across the industry as well as other governmental entities, you'll see ratios of 10% or more. So again, it's an indication of the CTA's continued commitment to control expenses. Next page, please. Again, I mentioned that we've done a very good job of creating budget efficiencies. In fact, if it weren't for those budget efficiencies over the last 5 or 10 years, our budget would be, over the 10-year period, about 20% higher than it currently is. So again, we've done a very good job of that, of controlling those expenses. In addition, we've done a good job of trying to identify additional budget efficiencies in our 2021 budget. And we'll continue to look for efficiencies as we move through the year. We've restricted hiring on vacant positions. We've locked in power costs at historically low prices. We've aligned our capital uses with capital funding sources. And we were also able to achieve $25 million of cost savings both in years 2020 and 2021 through the refinancing of existing bonds. We'll also continue to work with unions regarding additional concessions in 2021. And then the two historic levers that we have as a service board is one, fare increases. Unfortunately, based on current ridership levels, fare increases only generate about $5 million a year versus the $20 to $25 million that we would have received pre-COVID. And with regard to service adjustments, there would need to be dramatic reductions to close a gap of almost $400 million. For more details on that, I'll turn it over to Mike Connolly, who will walk through our current ridership and service.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next slide. And if you would, go to the next slide. CTA's ridership peaked in 2012 and has dropped a little bit each year since, mostly due to competition from other entities, including the ride-sharing industry that developed so rapidly in the mid-teens here. But this chart actually lays out our ridership from 2012 through 2020 projection. The bottom right-hand corner of the chart shows what we're projecting. We're actually expecting a rebound of about 8% in 2021. Next slide, please. The average ridership has increased in phases 3 and 4 of the reopening, as you can see from this chart. This chart starts in January of 2020 and runs through the end of September or the first week in October. And you can see the precipitous drop during the stay-at-home order, and then the slight rebounds after phase 3 and phase 4 as the city reopened. We've not seen even ridership across the city. It's been mentioned before, but the bus routes on the south and the west sides of the city have retained almost 2/3 of their ridership, while those in the downtown have only retained about 1/3 of their ridership. We've done a recent ridership survey looking at people who are riding the system during the pandemic period. And for those folks, transit service was critical for healthcare workers and to access food and other essential items during the stay-at-home order. You go to the next slide. Throughout the pandemic, as President Carter mentioned, CTA has maintained the highest levels of service to minimize crowding and optimize social distancing. We've added extra buses on routes, which the PACE folks have also done, to address crowding on specific routes where ridership has either increased or maintained more readily. We're running longer buses and longer train consists wherever possible to allow for social distancing. We set a limit of 15 passengers for a 40-foot bus, 22 for an articulated bus, and for each train car in our consists. And the diagram at the bottom of this slide actually shows a poster that's on the buses to encourage people to spread out the length and width of the bus and not congregate in the doors to block people's access, to encourage that social distancing. If you go to the next slide, we are also doing continuous monitoring. We're looking at our ridership trends on a daily basis, talking with our operations folks about what went out, what didn't go out, and where the system was the most crowded. We've scheduled extra service on those heavier bus routes. We're doing real-time monitoring of the rail station cameras by reviewing the camera feeds to look for crowding or social distancing issues. We've marked the platforms with little discs that say spread out, and we put them 6 feet apart so people could know how far to go. But we're also watching for that so that we can make an announcement if we see an instance of crowding at any of the stations. We've also implemented a pilot program for 2 pop-up essential bus lanes on 79th Street across the east and west, across the south side of Chicago, and on Chicago Avenue out towards the west side of Chicago from the downtown. These are intended to provide a quicker travel for the buses operating on those routes, to help us with potential crowding, and then to provide better reliability so that the buses will be able to make their schedules in a more reliable and regular time. We're using some ICE funding to address these COVID-19 mitigation efforts. If you will go to the next slide. It's been mentioned before, but CTA already had an aggressive vehicle and station cleaning protocol. We've upped that another notch, and that will continue throughout the duration of the pandemic. We also have a requirement that all riders wear masks on the system, and all bus operators are protected by a plastic, glass, or plexiglass shield. There is signage and messaging on the vehicles, and as I mentioned, in the stations themselves, to reinforce that masking and distancing requirement. We've also created a bus and a rail ridership dashboard, one for each of the 2 parts of our system, to allow customers to look up information that will predict how crowded each individual route or each individual run will be by time of day, so that the customers can look ahead to see and maybe adjust their pattern to travel at a time when it's less likely to be crowded. From here, I'll turn it back over to Jeremy, who's gonna move on with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Next page, please. Next page. Thank you. The 2021 through 2025 CIP is a $3.4 billion program. The largest source of funding is federal funds, followed by state bond funds, and the recurring pay-as-you-go revenues passed by the state last year. CTA will also continue to invest in its capital program through the issuance of bonds, and those bond issuances have been included in prior CIPs. The fiscal year 2025 federal formula and state PAYGO funds have not been allocated to the service boards, and we continue to work with RTA staff on the Invest in Transit framework, which will provide guidance on how the funding will be allocated in 2025 and beyond. So the total 5-year CIP is lower than it would be if that 5th year had been allocated. The CIP continues to fund transformative projects such as major rail line projects, including the Red Purple modernization, the Red Line extension to the south, and Your New Blue. We're also investing in bus and rail fleet modernization, the All Stations Accessibility Program, and the State of Good Repair projects. As we've talked about in the past, investing in the capital program drives economic development in the city and the region and is important for economic recovery. Per APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, for every dollar invested in transit, it generates $4 in economic benefit. So it's very important for us to continue to invest in our capital assets. Next slide, please. We outlined 3 major rail projects, and much of the work for Your New Blue is completed. But going into 2021, we will continue work on the O'Hare to Jefferson Park signal upgrade and the Harlem Station bus bridge reconstruction. The 5-year CIP provides for a final allotment of funding to complete the project development phase for the Red Line extension. And RPM is also continuing its design and stage construction work for the new structure, tracks, and station in the Lawrence to Bryn Mawr area. Next slide, please. This slide shows bus and rail fleet modernization efforts. On the bus side, we continue to purchase new standard buses as well as new electric buses and overhaul a portion of the existing fleet. On the rail side, we've funded the purchase of new 7000 series rail cars, overhaul work for the existing 5000 series rail cars, and the purchase of 4 new diesel locomotives. We also continue to invest in capital maintenance to target needs between overhaul cycles for both bus and rail. Next slide, please. Phase 1 of the All Stations Accessibility Program, known as ASAP, is funded through the 5-year CIP. ASAP is a comprehensive 20-year plan to make all stations vertically accessible. Phase 1 of the plan includes 9 stations to be made fully accessible, including 4 stations as part of the Red Purple Modernization Program. The Austin Green Line Station, California, Montrose, and Racine Blue Line stations, and State and Lake elevated stations, and upgrades or replacements to up to 20 existing elevators. Again, transit must be a part of the region's economic recovery. And indeed, we cannot wait until recovery occurs. So again, if we want a quick recovery, transit must be there immediately. And this is really kind of the guiding principle that we've used with regard to new station construction in the past. But again, transit is an integral part of the economic recovery that we'll see in the region. I'd also like to thank Bea and her staff with regard to their assistance through the budget process. It's always a challenge, but in this year in particular, their assistance has been much appreciated, and want to thank them.
Thank you, Jeremy. And with that, we complete our presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that the board may have at this time.
Thank you all 3. Audrey, you want to see who has their hands raised, please?
I'm gonna take a scroll and see if there's any hands. Right now, Director Colson, if you would look.
Okay, thank you. President Carter, particularly, this crisis reminds us how absolutely essential the CTA is to the very life of the city. And I agree with you that your operators are absolutely heroic. And when I see your bus drivers particularly, I'm just in awe of their skills and their courage. President Carter explained the full service model, and I understand the reasons for it, but it inevitably results in expenses going up, and so ridership goes down, and it's not sustainable long term. Since none of us really knows how much the federal government can or will keep on printing money to deal with this pandemic, is there a process in place for assessing service cuts? It seems to me if the public knew what they face, they might have an incentive to contact their representatives in Washington. So, I mean, there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of service that you would end up cutting first, or is that just is it too early to talk about that?
Couple of comments on that. One, yes, there is a process that we'll go through to identify service cuts, but I think it's also important to understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. And I hinted to that a little bit when I discussed previous doomsday scenario budgets compared to this one. For $375 million worth of service cuts, I have to cut about $550 million worth of service. That's because with every service cut, I lose revenue, which means I need to cut deeper. One of the things that you may recall is that we've had previous rounds of service cuts and adjustments to CTA based on prior budget challenges that we have faced. And so the low-hanging fruit disappeared a long time ago. What I'm doing now, if I have to do this, is really cutting into the bone, which is why I loathe to engage in that exercise.
Okay.
Clearly, if we don't get relief, we're going to have to begin a very public discussion about what those cuts are going to look like. And internally, we're working on that right now. But I can tell you in just broad strokes, it'll be painful and it'll be throughout the entire system. There is no way to engage in the level of service cuts that we're talking about without basically devastating everything that we're doing today, which is why it is such a untenable solution to this problem.
Right. Maybe some of your riders can contact their representatives in Washington. That would be helpful.
Well, I think it's safe to say, I mean, one of the things that we're happy about, and I think this has a lot to do with the cost savings and other things that we've done throughout the year, is that we have been able to extend our CARES Act money into next year.
Mm-hmm.
But we expect to run out of that money early next year. We are nowhere near in the position that PACE is in with regards to how long our money will last. And so the conversation around service cuts is going to start fairly soon if we don't start to see some expectation of some sort of relief from Congress. And so to your point, yes, when we start talking more about what this is going to mean, I expect that there will be a tremendous outcry from not only from our customers, but also things from elected officials who also expect CTA to continue to provide service, especially during the pandemic. I mean, I can't imagine a worse time for CTA to cut service than where we are right now. It runs counter to everything that we're trying to do as a city and as a country in terms of supporting people during these difficult times and allowing them to social distance and move around in a way that makes sense. And so you don't need to worry. I personally am going to be very vocal about what we need to do here. And I know I've got a lot of support with all the members of the board here when we start this up. And I expect that it will expand very quickly throughout the community when we have to start talking about what we're doing.
Okay, and one more area, and you and I talk about this every year. As I read the reports, 25% of your capital budget goes to debt service. And we've talked about that, and I applaud your efforts to refinance some bonds and get that number down. But in light of all this, do you have any plans to borrow more money short term to deal with this crisis, or do you have any plans to transfer capital to operating to deal with this?
We don't have any more plans to transfer any additional capital to operating. The question of whether or not we need to borrow money to deal with this crisis, I think, is still an unanswered question for us. We certainly plan to borrow next year as part of our capital program, which is something we'd always anticipated doing, particularly in light of the $13 billion of unmet capital needs that we're trying to deal with. But I think it's safe to say, as I think you heard from Rocky, and I'm sure you're going to hear from Jim, that all options are on the table, and all solutions that provide us with maximum flexibility to deal with this pandemic have to be considered. But at this point in time, we haven't made any decisions on that.
Okay, thank you so much, and we'll all get through this together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Colson. If you would lower your hand now. And next up, we have Director Lewis. If you would lower your hand and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Dorval, for what was a very complete presentation. Appreciate all the input. My question is a pretty simple one. In terms of, and maybe you mentioned it, I didn't listen carefully enough, but there's a differentiation between, say, bus versus train in terms of when you look at some of the impact of COVID-19 and where you might look to have to make adjustments? Is there a substantial difference between the bus routes versus the train routes, particularly given essential worker services, the need to make sure they have adequate transportation? Is that an area of differentiation where one versus the other, or is it really pretty much the same across the board when you look to try and figure out how to tighten up the expenses?
Well, obviously, I think the short answer to the question is yes. Cutting rail lines is a much more impactful action than cutting bus routes, but it's the connectivity between bus and rail that actually makes the whole system work. As you noted, our rail ridership has declined more than our bus ridership. So there's certainly a greater dependence on bus than rail. But having said that, our surveys have indicated that the essential workforce that is using CTA is using both modes, not just exclusively bus or rail. And so I think when you're talking about the magnitude of what we may be facing here in terms of a service reduction, it will certainly impact both bus and rail. To what extent the rail is impacted, I think up to a great degree, it's going to be driven by what we're doing at the bus service itself and where we can still establish some level of appropriate connectivity between our entire system to allow people to move around the city and the suburbs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. Next up, we have Director Sagar. If you would lower your hand and unmute. I think you're the last one.
Thank you so much for the report, Darrell. I appreciate that. I also want to say how much I appreciate the fact that you all have made such a careful and thorough examination and application of the efficiency savings that are there. We all know that there is a point or day of reckoning that you can only go so far. And so I know that that is an ongoing struggle, but I do appreciate what you all have done and what everyone has been doing across the service boards. The next question I have is a little bit in the weeds, and perhaps it's for Jeremy, but you mentioned towards the end the rolling stock anticipated investments. And I was just wondering if you can give me some indication of the 600 series bus versus an electric bus. What are the costs of a given unit for that? And then what's the cost of a 7000 series rail car?
Okay, I admit that you probably have stretched the limit of my off-the-cuff knowledge. I will turn to Jeremy or Mike to see if they can answer that specific question.
Thank you.
I do know just in general, electric buses are more expensive to purchase than regular diesel buses. But what we have seen is that over the life cycle cost of an electric bus, you recover those savings because of the efficiency that you get out of the need to not use fuel to operate them and the operational expenses in general for an electric bus versus a diesel fuel bus. But beyond that, I'm going to turn it to Mike or Jeremy to see if they can add anything more.
This is Jeremy Fine. I don't want to misstate, so we can definitely circle back on the exact numbers for each of those.
Yeah, I would say generally a diesel bus is running about $450,000 a piece right now. An electric bus is about $800,000 a piece right now. And our rail cars are just about $1 million a piece. 1.1, I think, was the last order.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I guess the question is, and I think, Darvel, you've approached us a bit, whether the investment in the electric buses at almost double, not quite double, but almost double the price is the pathway to be going down. But that's not for me to judge. I was just curious about that, but I appreciate that so very much. Thank you.
I will point out, Director, that we're in the process right now of doing a study to determine the best approach to actually integrating electric buses into our overall fleet. As you may know, we've made a commitment to go to a zero emission fleet in the next 20 years or 30 years. And so this is all part of that broader strategy. I do expect also that the prices of these vehicles are going to start to drop as more and more transit systems start to acquire them, which is certainly the trend that's occurring in general. These buses that are $800,000 now used to be over $1 million when the electric, fleet, first started coming onto the market. And we expect that those prices will continue to go down, just like you're seeing that occur with your personal vehicle and the cost of an electric car these days. So certainly all of that's being factored into an overall plan, which we hope to have early next year, that will then form the basis for the roadmap on how we're going to do all of this.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Sagar. We do have Director Gathing has a question. If you would lower your hand and unmute.
Thank you for such a thorough report. And my question is piggybacking on the earlier conversation about the service cuts. Do you have an estimated date or even a month by which we would know you'd have to start that conversation and start communicating what the service cuts would be if the $300 million does not materialize?
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns in that statement, because a lot of it is dependent on the burn rate of our remaining CARES Act funding, and that can be impacted by a factor of things, including whether there's another stay-at-home order that gets issued by the state at some point in time. Currently, we think that we're going to make the funding will last us into the early second quarter of next year. Under that scenario, we would probably have to start identifying employee layoffs and or service cuts probably sometime in the middle of the first quarter. So that would be the time frame that we'll be working on, barring other factors that can come into play, of which, I can't even list all the ones that may impact this timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see, Director Andalcio. I'm sorry, Director Andalcio, if you lower your hand and unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I really appreciate your detailed report, and I sincerely can appreciate the trying times. You did mention employees from an operations standpoint. Are you looking, we're talking about cutting in services to meet the budgetary constraints, but from a procurement, personnel, projects, are you looking at that as well? Some of these capital projects will be on hold because of this budget shortfall?
Well, as you know, Director, my capital funding and my operating funding are two different pots. And so they're not necessarily impacted one against the other. We have not made any plans at this point to cut back on our capital program, mainly because we have such a desperate need to repair our infrastructure. And at least in the short term, it's our intended plan to continue to move forward as our budget lays out. None of us can predict where we're going to be a year from now, or what the ultimate impact of all this is going to be. But we don't have any immediate plans at this point to cut back on our capital plans.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I see no additional hands raised, Chairman.
Okay.
Do you have anything that you'd like to make at this point?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I just want to
keep overlooking you.
No, thank you. I just want to thank the CTA as well as Rocky, who may have dropped off, but he may still be on, just for your cooperation. Two comments. Dorval, I read yesterday of the brutal cuts that New York is making, especially with respect to their subway operation. While you hate to point out here in Chicago, for purposes of panic, the kinds of cuts that might have to be made after the first of the year, I would clearly use the New York example, and you can say, hey, look what happens in New York if you don't get the appropriate funding from Washington, and for that matter, even the state. And a comment to Jeremy, and I would use Dorval, I'd use New York. as an example. That way you don't have to panic people here, but you can show them how dire this is if we don't get the appropriate funding. Jeremy, thank you as always, and to the CTA Jeremy and my Jeremy LaMarche. Those state cuts, Jeremy, keep those numbers handy. I'm doing a congratulatory letter to all of the state officials who were elected a week or so ago, and in there, I'm thanking them for the capital bill, which we so desperately waited a decade for. But I want to point out to them that we have seen cuts on operations from the state. So I want to give them those kinds of numbers, because I always get from state legislators, my old colleagues, hey, we just gave you a lot of money. We gave you billions. And I would say, yes, thank you. We waited 10 years for it. We are deeply appreciative and we'll use it wisely. But you're cutting our operation funding when you cut PTF, and they've scaled back ADA operations and other things. And most legislators have no clue that they've been cutting our operation funding. And then I remind them of their sales tax skim now, where they take a percentage of our sales taxes for doing an operation that really is a state service. But I want those numbers, Jeremy, and I'll have my Jeremy double back with you. But I just want to remind, especially state officials, that they are cutting back our state operations funding. While we're greatly appreciative of the capital monies, we got to remind them no more state cuts, and it's going to be a very contentious budget year in Springfield. And I just want to make sure that we don't get cut operationally any further from Springfield. But thank you all, as well as Jim Drowinski's coming up. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the cooperation of all of you with B and with the staff at the RTA. We're deeply appreciative, and thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of comments to your remarks. One, as always, we are extremely appreciative of your leadership for the region in terms of advocating for funding for transit. I have not read your Wall Street Journal letter, but I will certainly find it and read it immediately after this meeting. Secondly, with regards to New York MTA, I think you're absolutely right that New York MTA is a good model to look at. From a percentage of budget perspective, obviously New York is looking at billions of dollars in terms of deficits. But from a percentage of budget perspective, New York MTA's deficit and CTA's deficits are almost identical. So that should give you some indication of what type of service adjustments we would be facing if we have to implement $550 million worth of service cuts. So I think you're right to say that that's a good place to look to see what the potential impact would be. But I think it's also safe to say that when I try to come with another name for this budget besides doomsday, because that's been used so many times in our history, it is hard for me to find the right descriptive word to discuss the type of budget we're facing here if we don't get relief from this deficit. And hopefully with your leadership, with the support of this board, with the support of local elected officials here in the city and in the region, along with our downstate legislatures and our congressional representative, we can find a solution to this problem.
And Dorval, thank you. And you've always taught me the difference between how difficult it is to run a system the size of New York and ours. And you do such a magnificent job here. Everybody uses you as or us sometimes as the example. Will you at some point in time, Dorval, have specific kinds of cuts you could show us similar to New York? And I know you walk this fine line between wanting to you may have it internally, but if you could at some point in time at least work with our staff to show us the kinds of cuts we'd have to make like New York, what they really mean to Chicagoland, that's probably useful to us. But right now, I get the analogy, and read about the awful things that are happening in New York, which will have to happen here too, unless we get one more short-term stimulus package, as well as some long-term help from Washington, and no more cuts from Springfield. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, Jeremy, and Dorval. Appreciate it. All right, Audrey, we ready to move on to Mr. Zawinski and Metra?
We are, and if Mr. Dewinski and his crew will unmute as needed, and we can begin.
We need to share in a second here. 1 second.
Hey, Audrey, while we're waiting, I believe Director Canty had her hand up.
I did, Nadine. Thank you for noticing. I just wanted to piggyback off something that Chairman Dillard had said, because it sounded to me like you were kind of asking Mr. Carter or President Carter to present I'll call it a doomsday budget light, kind of give us the absolute worst case scenario. And I just wanted to understand, are you asking that of all the service boards or just CTA?
Well, we need it from all three, Director Canty, and it's painful. And I know we walk this fine line, but internally they need to be figuring this out, which I'm sure they are. And then they have to, especially the CTA, obviously Dorval and company will have to coordinate with their own board, as well as the mayor's office as to how they lay that out. But obviously Rocky, Jim, and Dorval and their fine staff are really going to have to sit down internally, and it's painful. It's horrible. I've been there before. Never of this magnitude of what those kinds of cuts, if we don't get some more federal assistance, are going to look like. So
sure.
Yeah, all three of them need to go through that exercise.
And that makes sense, because I had some thoughts that would apply to all the service boards, and so I was trying to wait until we got to the end, but I wanted to understand your comment back to President Carter. So thank you for that.
Okay, my apologies, Director Canty. I missed you in my scrolling. Let me take one more quick look here before we move on to Metra, just in case. Okay, we are good to go with Metra. Mr. Drawinski, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, and I hope you see about 10,000 horsepower coming your way. A lot of conversation, obviously, today with PACE CTA. I'm not going to go over a lot of the same details and same comments. It's really humbling to run behind Rocky and also Dorval and his team, because obviously these are unprecedented times, and I don't really need to belabor that. But we do have a lot of similarities. We also have some unique differences. So good morning, directors. For those of you who I've not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Jim Drawinski. I am the CEO and Executive Director of Metra. As I take you through Metra's 2021 operating budget and highlighting some of our capital plans, I hope to answer a lot of the questions you may have, and I look forward to those questions at the end. Joining me today is Tom Farmer, our CFO. I want you to remember the headlight that you're seeing on this first slide here. So operating budget highlights, pretty simple. No fare increases this year. We didn't feel that that was fair to do that to any of the people of the region right now. So that was one of the core values as we move forward. The operating budget is balanced, but it's balanced with a $70 million hole, and we are going to need further action. Those further actions will either come in additional federal aid, as already discussed, decreased in expenses, and or increased fare revenues. From where we're at now, I'll take you through our projections. Our current highest ridership lines are similar to President Carter's lines. They are serving the underserved areas of the region, the ones where passengers are most dependent. So very, very similar in that perspective. We say we might need to increase service as ridership returns. I'll take you through a little bit how we're doing good with physical distancing right now, but as ridership regains, depending on how vaccinations and comfort levels of people getting closer together, we actually may need to be running more service than we did even prior to this pandemic. So here's where we were in 2020. We started with an 827.4 budget. As you can see, the revenues coming in from sales tax and the fare box. This was pre-COVID. So I'd like to then take you to what happened and where we're at today. In 2020, we now look at about $506 million of revenue coming in. That's going to have to be supplemented with 222 of our 479 of CARES Act money. We were able to really pull down the expenses by $92.4 million in service reduction and other cost savings. When the pandemic hit, like I reported earlier to this board in the year, the first thing we did is we reduced our service down to about 50%, a little over 50% of our current service level. We actually had a plan in place for these major snow events, big service interruptions. So it was already posted, it was already on the website, and it continues to provide service for all 11 lines. We've had started to adding incremental trains back on individual lines as we see ridership patterns slightly changing, but even today, our highest line is really only running at about 15% pre-COVID. The 21 budget is going to be based on $700 million, and I'm going to take you to where we got to that $700 million on the next slide. But as I pointed out, 479 is our CARES money. If you add those two together, they don't add up to 479. And we did that strategically because of all the uncertainty and what's going to happen with the ridership, the vaccinations. Sales tax revenue is one of our obviously biggest incomes here, and what's going to happen with that as this economy either struggles to regain itself or actually accelerates to regain itself. So I'll take you to the 700 in a second. These other two lines represent what we could do in 22 and then 23. What we forecast in 21 is to go from 20 to 50% of pre-COVID ridership. That's our budget. We're already not going to hit 20 by the end of this year. There's no way that's going to happen. So our 70 million hole may even start larger than it already is forecast. In 22, we forecast going from 50 to 80. And then in 23, we actually forecast being at 80. This is based on no science. As Dorval Carter said, as Rocky Donahue said, we are writing this book every day. There is no playbook here. So these are the estimates we're using. We hope those numbers come in much more positive. So allowable expenses based on recovery ratio are listed there. But this line here is important. The cost to run regular service. As we go ahead and bring back service, we anticipate our schedules will not look exactly like they did pre-COVID, but they will have to have trains put back on them, not just for social distancing, but obviously for the things that we're good at. Bringing a lot of people from a great distance away downtown in large numbers. We're going to get back there. COVID is going to be gone someday, and we're going to have to start building that. So it's not going to happen in January. We all know that. But as we look to the future and as we look to starting to recover and regain our strength and rebuild the economy of the region, we're looking at a potential deficit to try to get to where we really should be running of about 570 over the next 3 years. Once again, it's not going to turn on like a light in January, and we recognize that. Looking at our 21, I'd like to take you to how we got to 700. The 827 minus the 92 that we saved through cost expense reductions, fuel, labor, and other initiatives here, we're down to 735 as a base. We're going to add 35 to that through inflation and normal, our PTC, the friend, the gift that keeps giving, and that's going to put us at 770. So that gives us that $70 million hole that I talked about. Once again, we're going to need federal assistance to get through this. We're in a good position, a little bit better than CTA when it comes to a glide path of when CARES will run out, but all the uncertainty in front of us still makes us build a budget around reality, the reality of what we have. So what's our strategy? Well, we're going to stretch CARES into 22 as I spoke about. Hopefully we don't have to clip into any of that. If we don't get any money as we look at ridership regaining, if we get money, this all changes. We're going to lobby, obviously, for additional COVID funding. You know, the great thing about the delegation here in Illinois is they've kept up with us. They've requested meetings on a normal basis with all the service boards. They've checked in with us, how we're doing, what are we doing with the CARES money, and at least the 14 members that represent this region up here are lock sync with our requests and our needs. And that's been just a great to know that Washington's hearing us. But I do agree that constituents eventually are going to have to reach out to delegation as well. Hopefully we're in a much better state moving into the beginning of next year. We're going to provide greater mobility options. Once again, what does that look like? Right now we're doing, as Rocky pointed out, we eliminated some service and he had to eliminate some bus routes. So we'd like to put all that back together. We're going to be ready to ramp up those service levels as our ridership patterns change. That includes express trains. That's what Metro's really good at, bringing a lot of people in a great distance with large volumes to the central business district. And that's what we're going to have to start ramping up to sometime. Explore new fare options. So we put out a $10 all-day pass, and we did that early on when we started getting back into cash collection on the trains in June. It's been highly successful. We're going to continue that for many months now, it probably looks like. But once again, we're going to have to reinvent ourselves coming out of this. I see us in a lot of ways being a whole new Metro. We'll talk about that in a second here. Our service restoration principles, provide consistent and frequent service throughout the day. We want to start getting to where we have memorable patterns so that people on any different line can say, yeah, I know the train's always here after the hour, or it's going to leave the city after the hour. The new express service, of course, is going to be a reaction to the constituents that we normally carry. We are going to consider transfers. That's what our $10 pass allows right now. Someone can come in on any Metro line and use that pass anywhere on the system, no matter what zone you came in from. We're really looking at the popularity of that pass through some surveys. We're going to explore some new markets and of course, promote regional equity. So on the pass products, one thing new for us this year is we split the Saturday and Sunday pass. Traditionally, it's been $10 for Saturday and Sunday. We're moving it down to $7, and it'll be Saturday or Sunday. We remain with the 2-day pass at $10 on the mobile only. Both are going to be valid for 14 days. But the things that we're really excited about are the welcome back programs and promotions, the new multi-day passes, potential off-peak pricing. Every one of these has a discount in mind, because as we look toward recovery of Metro and recovery of the region, one of the key elements for loss of congestion, better emissions footprints, and economic vitality is going to be to get people to use transit again. We're not over COVID hump yet. We all know that. We're encouraged, though. So remember that headlight I talked to you about? It may be dim right now, but it really represents a point in the future where we can start seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's really what our core mission is looking at right now. So what have we done? We did a campaign and initiative called My Metro. We really tapped into a lot of internal attributes of our employees, and we moved that into an external campaign early in September. COVID numbers were really doing good in September, and when we kicked off this campaign, we actually saw a 10% week-over-week ridership gain. What we were doing is taking out that question in people's lives: is it safe to commute? So the campaign is called Commute with Confidence. We pushed this message out on social media, radio, you see the billboard up there, print, and along with some TV commercials. I'm going to show you a commercial here in a second. Hopefully the electronic portion of this works for you. And it demonstrates what Metro's done to make the passenger trip safe, including cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, signage, physical distancing, and face coverings, of course.
When it comes to commuting, we know your concern. But on My Metro, we're committed to your safety. Every day, we're sanitizing and disinfecting our trains. We use hospital-grade air filters. You'll find hand sanitizer on board. Masks are mandatory. We're practicing physical distancing and giving you extra time at your station, all to get you to work or home safely and on time. You see, we're still your best way to commute. That's why it really is My Metro for all of us.
So as we launched that, one of the initiatives, like I said, was taking the internal piece of Metro and really valuing the employees' input, really taking a look at what we're good at, how proud we are, what we do, and the hard work. Just like Dorval, just like Rocky, our employees are real heroes. They've come to work every day. They continue to work in that environment out there, putting trains out. The people that work in the offices or working remotely continue every single day to give their heart to this company. And they're dealing with everything that all of us are dealing with families, friends, and the COVID pandemic. One initiative we're super excited about, and our board just passed an IGA last Friday, is the Fair Transit South Cook program. It goes back to the South Cook mobility study done about a year and a half ago. This IGA now is going to reduce fares on Metro Electric and Rock Island to our current reduced fare rate beginning early in 21. Our target is January 4. This is a really much needed improvement down there. Why? Because we've raised fares 6 of the last 9 years, and we really believe that the price point has pushed people off the system, specifically in those 2 lines, where the underserved and maybe more transit-dependent riders are at. So we're very, very excited with this new partnership, and we look forward to this kicking off in the new year. I want to take you into our capital program now, and kind of talk about some of the highlights we have here. Our outlook is very bright. Why? Because Illinois last year passed the first capital program, as the chairman indicated, in over a decade. So with that infusion of money and the need to do a lot of state of good repair and actually start regrowing the system, the one thing that we recognized is that we actually needed some help to get this done. This is monies that Metro hasn't seen in quite a while or ever at this level. So what we've done is brought on a project management oversight to help us get through this. We had some guiding principles on every capital project we're working on: regional equity, increased mobility, increased accessibility. Just like CTA has some stations that aren't ADA compliant, Metro does too. A lot of our cars are not ADA compliant. So our goal in capital investment is to bring our system to be more accessible. Increase our operating efficiency. This is something that Dorval Carter pointed out many times. If we're not trying to drive efficiency, we're not being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And so we're constantly trying to drive efficiency, safety, and of course, reduce our emissions footprint. We really look at these projects in 4 major categories: bridges, rolling stock, stations, and long-term capital projects. These are the highlights of the major capital projects that we have just for the 2021 program. And like I alluded to, we have a project management oversight that we brought on. We put out an RFP in March. Our board approved the contract in August. We did notice to proceed in September, and I've got to admit, they're impressing the heck out of us. They're off and running. The first 100-day report to our board is due in January, and this is really exciting for us. We selected WSP USA Inc. This slide here depicts some major transit projects they've done, including the Chicago to St. Louis high-speed project, and right below it, the California high-speed rail program. These guys are experts working with rail and transit, and they're showing it every single day. But one of the things that we really love about them is the fact that we set a DB goal of 30%, and they actually committed to a 34%. So with the project management oversight now providing a great boost in our DB program, this once again is a great investment back into our region as we start to recover. So I talked about bridges. This is just an example of some bridges. One of the big bridge projects we're going to be doing this year is going to be on the Milwaukee North Line. It'll start up this year. It's called Bridge 832. It's going to involve the Grayland Station and 2 adjacent bridges. But I really wanted to take you through bridges for a quick second, because it's important to understand, you know, when the passenger goes over a bridge, they don't ever think about it. They may look down over the side, but they really don't think about it. They may look at the river down below them or the traffic down below them, because Metro's going way faster than that traffic. But the fact of the matter is, Metro's bridges are in bad shape. On a daily basis, we run over 800 bridges, some of which we 100% own, some of which are obviously owned by the freight partners that we're with. We share in a lot of that cost when we're with freight partners on a replacement of the bridge. But I wanted to talk to you about the bridges for a second to illustrate this point. So this is 2020. If we go back 100 years, because that's about the life expectancy of a bridge, it's 1920. If we were to start attacking all of Metro's bridges that were built before 1920, this is what it might look like. If we were to replace 10 bridges a year for the next 9 years, which we rarely replace 10 bridges a year, we would have completed all the bridge work for the bridges that are older than 1900. The year would now be 2030. So let's say we start working on those bridges from 1901 to 1910. That would take us another 20 years, and the year would now be 2050. If we wanted to get all the way to those bridges built before 1920, it'd be another 17 years. This is a real problem for Metra. This is a real problem for the region, because now the year is 2067, and we've only caught up to the bridges that were a century old today. So we really need continued long-term, programmable, sustainable funding. This problem is not going to go away. These bridges are not going to get younger, but I just want to make sure everybody understands they're safe. We put a lot of money into these bridges because they're old. We inspect them regularly, but they're costing a lot of money to maintain. New bridges provide a lot of amenities, such as greater access at the roadway level. In a lot of cases, we really can reconfigure the traffic flow around us. We don't have the luxury, and I say that very smartly, as PACE and CTA Bus has, where someone else is going to build our roadway. We're 100% responsible, just like CTA Rail, for maintaining our roadway. That includes all of these bridges. Another major place that we actually have to put a lot of money in is interlockings. That's an interlocking there on the left. That's where the Rock Island crosses over the CN at 16th Street. So all of those tracks are at grade level. You can clearly tell only one direction of traffic can go at a time. And that little building that you see on the upper right-hand or upper left-hand corner there, that's a tower where they manually control all of those signals and switches. That needs to go away. That needs to be PTC upgraded, electronically upgraded, and controlled from our dispatching center. Metra still has 3 of these mechanical towers still in place that need to be replaced. And the towers aren't the issue. It's the actual infrastructure that they're controlling. On our facilities and equipment, these are some examples of some signs. We call it TroyNet. We're going to finally modernize and actually have digital signs running out there. This was the prototype we put out about a year ago. This is at McCormick Place. We're in the current process of purchasing these signs. This, unfortunately, is something that COVID affected by the supply chain. Another thing that we're going to be bringing to the board very shortly is going to be ticket vending machines, enhanced ticket vending machines that take credit cards. Today's experience on Metra is not good. If you come to our train and you want to buy a ticket on the train with your credit card, you can't. Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, you can't pay. We only take cash, or you already have to have a ticket. Our goal is to start deploying these vending machines next year and start making the customer experience much better. Speaking of stations, this is a station that was built in 1926. This happens to be 95th Street. It's next to Chicago State University. Before it was Chicago State University, it was an actual rail yard. Station hasn't changed. Everything else around it's changed. This is one of the stations that we're going to be targeting in the next goal. With all the Illinois Rebuild Program, we have tons of stations we're going to start upgrading. But I point out the fact that the 1926 station, although functional, is certainly not inviting. This is 59th Street. At the opposite end of this station is 60th Street. This is the new gateway to the Obama Library once that gets built. And when that happens, I'm certain that we would like to have a much more inviting system. So these are the stations that we're working on currently in the next year, and these are the stations that we're working on in the next 2 to 5 years. All the stations I just highlighted in red are stations that will become ADA accessible 100%. Other stations will be getting much needed upgrades. But you can see why we really wanted to bring a PMO on. The amount of construction work that we're going to do is impressive. And what does construction work equal? In an economic recovery, jobs, jobs, jobs. This is Auburn Park rendering on the left and Peterson Ridge on the right. 2 stations that we're going to be building in the city of Chicago where stations didn't exist. I'd like to now talk to you a little bit about rail cars. So one of the major areas of our capital program is rolling stock, and the most exciting component of that is the new rail cars. We're currently analyzing responses that we received in request from our RFP we issued last year. We've allowed manufacturers to propose alternate designs from our current gallery car. This slide doesn't show what it looks like with new rail cars. This slide shows the next 20 years what it looks like without new rail cars. You've all heard of transit asset management. All you need to know here is everything in yellow and green, that's where you want to be running your system. Everything in red and orange, that's beyond useful life. That's not where you want to be running your system. The green actually represents our rebuild program. We just expanded our 49th Street facility, and I invite all board members of the RTA board to come out and take a look at our rebuild program that we do out there. It's really an impressive program. This is what it looks like with new rail car procurement. You can see the first rail cars won't even come in until 2024 because it takes so long to build rail cars, but you can see the orange and the red finally start fading away. And they're replaced with the blue, which is the highest in transit asset management. Up until they're 14 years old, they can stay blue. They never go blue again. But in this case, we would be replacing all of our cars from 1953 to 1980. These are the cars that require the most maintenance. They have the least amount of amenities. They are not ADA compliant. Newer car designs are much greater crashworthiness standards and much greater passenger enhancements. It's time that the 1950s to the 1980s cars find a new home. Also in rolling stock, we're doing a lot of work on locomotives. One of our key components, as I said earlier, is efficiency. So I'm going to highlight that center, the F40 and the F59 locomotive engine upgrades. This is reducing our emissions footprints. And then right below that, the DC to AC conversion. This is actually going to really make our fuel economy go up and also the reliability go way up, because this is modernizing really old equipment at a really good price point. And we're going to try to do all that work in-house to the best of our ability. I talked about multi-year projects. This is that picture that a lot of people see in the winter. Metros light their tracks on fire. This is our A2 interlocker. This is what it looks like when you're flying over from a satellite. What it is, it's the 4 Union Pacific tracks moving from right to left, going directly over at grade the 3 Milwaukee tracks coming from the bottom to the top. There's 41 switches in there. There's a little tower that's up in the left-hand corner that mechanically controls all those switches. Our plan is to actually replace this. See those 2 bridges there? Guarantee you they're in that other slide. And the plan is to replace this with a big flyover. This is what it potentially could look like. The pink represents Ogilvie and the Union Pacific coming out of Ogilvie going on the west line. On the left, you see what we have to do now. We have to cross the tracks. On the right, you can see it flies over the other tracks. And so this brings efficiency, this brings reliability, and it takes out that pinch point of A2. Replacing A2, replacing those bridges, replacing that control tower there are just money not wisely spent in our future. A2 is circled in red right there on this map. Why do I have this map up? Because we've talked about this before. This is our path to go to O'Hare. It exists. We go to O'Hare every day. We just have very horrible service there because at this point in time, we're competing with freight trains, other metro trains. Our goal is to actually take this and turn this into O'Hare Express, using our existing right-of-way by adding more trackage, some bridges. Some stations are going to have to be moved, and critical flyovers like A2, the next pivot point up there, A5, and the final pivot point over there, B12, as we would fly over those freight trains, giving them the ability to perform the services they need and not impact trains that potentially could be going to and from O'Hare in about a 22-minute interval. This is a final slide on this. This is a large multi-year project called the 75th Street SIP. It's in phase 1 right now. It's funded at like $480 million. The next phase is going to be about $560 million. There's about 14 partners in on this one, including the county, the state, and the federal government. on this particular project, what we're doing is we're unlocking the biggest bottleneck in the entire country for freight and passenger. This is what it looks like. This is the slide that tells you everything. 7 different rail lines coming together. What eventually is going to happen is that blue train on the right, it's going to fly over those other railroads. So you can see clearly how the stop signal is gone. Now all of a sudden we're just running trains right and left, and we're running trains over the top of them. And that blue train's going to fly so far, it's going to go over 71st Street, decongesting traffic in that region as well. Our DB slide here just shows our participation in the last year was $106 million. That's a good number for us, and we're proud of that. And this shows we've been meeting our goals. The overall goal on the federal side, we didn't meet, and a lot of that had to do with COVID this year. We met the federal established goal, but we didn't meet our own numbers of last year of 28%. This slide here talks about something that's been occurring now for months, and that there's a huge move to the suburban housing market. I think a lot of you know that. We look at this as opportunity for people who may have been traditionally closer to their work. We know that everyone's not going to come back to Metro 5 days a week. We know we have a lot of available seats. We also know that we have a whole new audience of people. So people come in to Central Business District 2 to 3 days a week, maybe not 5 days a week, they still need that same seat. And that's why Metro has to be here for the economic recovery of the region. And that talks about the same thing. I hope this presentation shows that Metro, we're ready to take the region forward in many ways. I can't agree more with the other executive directors that there's no book for this again. We're writing this book every day. There's no perfect solution, and clearly every single month we have to make adjustments. Transit cannot fail. As you pointed out, Chairman, New York's a great example. And that's why we need to be very carefully watching New York, because transit in this country cannot fail. That concludes my presentation if you have any questions.
That was great, Jim. Thank you. Audrey, what hands are we seeing?
Okay, we're going to start with Director Andalcio. If you would lower your hand and unmute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Dowinski. Wow, what a presentation. Again, I certainly appreciate your creative approach, thinking out of the box. Yes, we're in dire needs. Your potential pilot program is absolutely fantastic. But more importantly, your marketing initiative. You're letting know that you're giving confidence back to the users of the system. Hey, we're doing everything that's necessary to make sure you have a safe experience on our trains. And I think that is key, because people are still fearful of traveling. And it is so good to see. You talked about jobs. A lot of people are losing their jobs. And I'm so happy to see a program that's near and dear to my heart, the DBE program, $106 million. That is absolutely fantastic. And more importantly, your capital program is moving forward and exceeding the DBE goals. Again, that's going to put people to work and create jobs. I'm really impressed with that. And, I have personally visited some of your groundbreaking ceremonies, and I was so impressed by the project design and, more importantly, the community involvement in elected officials. So I want to say thank you so much for what you're doing. More importantly, being very creative and thinking out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Next up, we have Director Carey. If you would lower your hand, please, and unmute.
I'll echo what previous board members said and say it was a great presentation, Jim. I really appreciate all the detail and the time put into it. I have a couple specific questions. You're projecting, you said at one point that you were projecting to end the year at 20% ridership, but you're not sure you would make that. And in the 2021 budget, you're projecting 50% ridership. And I'm really wondering how realistic that is, given that in best case, vaccine becomes available early next year, and it could take the entire year to roll it out across the country. And I know, large corporations that have already told employees, don't even think about coming back till next summer, which is half the year. So what are you basing that on, the 50%?
Well, that's a great question, Director. I believe at any stretch of the imagination, like I said, we have to take a calculated guess somewhere. And we thought originally, believe it or not, we were at 80%, and we really refined that way back because of the fact these factors are just changing. When we looked at September and we launched out the My Metro Commute with Confidence campaign, we saw a 10% week over week, and we saw a slow, steady climb. And we were climbing at a good trajectory until this latest wave come. We meet and talk with all the time different businesses, and we're constantly in that position of talking about when are you going to bring your people back. And they're keeping their cards close to their chest for a lot of different reasons. But the one thing that's for certain, face-to-face business is going to come back. Once again, we clearly believe it's not going to be 5 days a week, and we clearly believe that budget number that we present is going to have to be refined as we start getting real data in. We're very disappointed, with the latest round of COVID infections, that ridership has declined. We were very confident, feeling like 21 was going to be a different year. The vaccination clearly is a trigger to make things start changing. So we're going to stick with the 50%, but I'm going to also say to you, we'll probably end up going to revise it. If it doesn't hit 50%, that $70 million hole grows. Our work grows. That's why CARES money is so important. HEROES, CARES, federal aid. It's going to give all the service boards, not just here in Chicago, but the entire nation, a 2 to 3 year glide path to really recover. To try to figure out how you're going to get to 50% or 80% in 2 years, it's very impossible to project that right now. That's why we really need a fairly decent chunk of federal aid. We support APTA's initiative to request $32 billion federal aid for the entire region.
Okay, thank you. As you said, if you don't get to 50%, that 70 million hole could be larger. And that actually is my second question. Just as some of my fellow board members questioned on the CTA, at what point do you identify, the cuts you would need to make if federal money doesn't become available, or if maybe not enough federal money becomes available? So I have the same question for you. 70 million, do you have ideas now? What is the process? What we need as board members here is a comfort level. And I think Chairman Dillard, and other board members have made that point too. We know you can't give us specifics today, and we're not asking that, but we need, because we're basically approving, with the exception of PACE, the other two budgets are not what you normally call a balanced budget. It's a balanced budget with an asterisk, which is expecting either service cuts or additional revenue that is not identified today. So what is your process to figure out, how to make up that 70 million or more?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly it's something we don't have a direct answer on. Our glide path right now takes us, like I showed you in the budget presentation, toward the end of 21. As we move into the next quarter, second quarter, I'll say, of 21, if we don't have federal assistance, we're certainly going to be looking at how tight the belt's going to have to get. We're doing everything we can on an operational side to continue to reduce the expense. And by even demonstrating we've done 92 million this year, I think we've demonstrated that we've got some ongoing things that we can do. Certain locomotives, for example, are more fuel efficient than others, and we do everything we can to run the most fuel efficient locomotives versus the ones that are out there using a little bit more fuel. Every little bit, I think, is going to help. But to get to the really heart of your question, Metro reduced its service down to 55% when this occurred. We provide service on all 11 lines. 3 of our lines right now are completely decimated of service, meaning Heritage Corridor has only 2 trains in, 2 trains out. North Central service, only 2 trains in, 2 trains out. And Southwest service is completely off of what its normal 30 trains should be. Most of our express trains aren't running right now. So this is a chicken and the egg. Even as some ridership comes back, we know people want to get downtown, not on a milk run train. They're coming from Hinsdale or coming from Naperville. They want to be on a 32-minute hot shot. And to put that out there is going to cost money. So in our budget, we've actually budgeted at least a dozen new trains that we're going to have to be experimenting with in the course of this year. And I think to get to the point, it's that experimentation, that data that's going to come in that's going to help us drive where those trains are. This is not going to be easy. It's not going to be weekends only, trains that run till 2 in the morning. Those are the easy answers if you want an easy way out. But we're doing two things at once. We're balancing a budget, and we're still trying to provide some amount of resiliency for the commuting public out there as they try to start coming back downtown. And we're also looking at that new market. So we really believe data is going to be the key to making those decisions, and that data doesn't exist yet. It will start existing more and more and more as we move into 21.
Okay. Thank you for your answers. And I just want you to understand that I totally understand how hard all this is. It's just we try to achieve, as I said, a comfort level that you all are, all three service boards are, not going to hit a wall, in the middle of 2021 and, oh, what do we do? But what I'm hearing today is that you're all working very hard on, even if it's not information you can share with us today, on what you might have to do in worst case scenario. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a number of board members with questions, so just be patient and we'll get to you. Next up will be Director Sagar. If you will lower your hand and unmute.
Jim Brian Sager, I just want to say how impressed I am. That was an absolutely exceptional presentation. I want to say thank you very much for that. I also want to say that I'm always impressed by Metra's outreach programs. I think that the effort that you're making through billboards and public service announcements with regards to the confidence question is exceptional. And I think that you've always done a good job in that, and that's going to become increasingly important as we try to return our ridership. And so I commend you all and encourage you in that continued effort. The other thing I want to say is that I also appreciate very much your positive outlook. As you say, COVID is going to end someday. And I think that I appreciate so much the far-reaching outlook that you're making in terms of efficiencies towards O'Hare, for example, or to try to reduce the congestion of lines that are coming together, and looking forward to increases in that regard. I also am pleased with the fact that you recognize the outward migration, which is occurring from the urban area out into suburban area. I mean, frankly, here in McHenry County and Woodstock in particular, we are seeing increased housing starts, and it's almost surprisingly so at this time. It's not just because of the COVID situation and individuals wanting to move from more congested urban areas, but it's also that, frankly, there seems to be a resumption of that outward growth that had started prior to the 2018 economic downturn, and that's kind of starting to return now, it appears. And so as we look to that continued growth, which is not going to happen in a huge tsunami all at once, but is going to happen gradually, we have to be looking to the long-term approach. And so I appreciate very much the efforts that are being made by Metra in that regard, as exemplified by your commentary today. So I look forward to working with you as we see how we can get through this COVID and move into that more hopeful future. Thank you so much.
Okay, next up we have Director Canty. If you will lower your hand and unmute.
Thanks, Audrey. I want to thank everybody that has made their presentations today. They've been really helpful, as I'm trying to, as the new person on this board, put all of this information together. And my question, I'm going to ask it to you, Mr. Nowinski, but it is really a more general question. So I am not as optimistic about the federal funding, right? And so what's been troubling me as I've been going through all of the information that, we've been reading about and hearing about beforehand and listening today, I am still concerned that we are missing an opportunity to both be innovative and to be really transparent with people, right? I think we're trying very hard. I think all the boards have done a good job of trying not to hit that panic button. But in so doing, I worry that we're going to get into February of next year, March of next year, and further on, and it's just going to hit us like a freight train, that all of a sudden we're going to have to make deep cuts in the services that we provide. And I have to say that, COVID for me really highlights the way that I view public transit, which is as a public good, right? It is not something that can be done, I don't think, in a profitable way, because you are trying to move people that need public transit, and you can only get so much out of fare generation and et cetera. So I guess, it's a challenge and a question, looking for innovation, and you've highlighted some things, but has there been any kind of bigger consideration to these, try fast, fail fast options, right? Have we thrown out a big option like, hey, why don't we rethink how we do our funding, and instead of each service board working on their own, how can we work together and present a united front, or see where we can help each other, in the short term, which helps us all in the long term? So I'll start with that question.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful of you, being a new member of the board. That's absolutely what we should be doing. The RTA has been leading that kind of conversation for a while. Honestly, just getting us to the point where we had this massive capital infusion last year was a result of that kind of discussion. The operating side is the next big elephant in the room. And I echo what Chairman Dillard said. We need Springfield not to cut any operating dollars and put us in a position where we're having to either take out loans or use capital dollars to fill the fuel tank. So I'm not sure I can answer your question with anything specific other than I agree with you that we really need to take a look how public transit's funded. I'm the chairman of what's called the Commuter Rail Coalition. It's a new group that was put together last year, and I communicate with the other 30 commuter railroads, or a vast majority of them, on a normal basis. It is amazing to me how different segments of the country fund transit way differently. Our funding is based on 1983 and then a revision in 2008. And in both cases, I believe we back into a budget corner every year. I think we need to look at it more comprehensively so that we can actually build budgets from the revenue side that actually build transit that people can absolutely use and not make these hard decisions. This is all pre-COVID, so I agree with you.
Okay, fantastic. And so then, I really appreciate that, you're working with, I think you said the Commuter Rail Coalition. Is there something more that as an RTA board we can do to help facilitate the conversations across the service boards, even in our region, right? The new pilot that you just talked about, it sounds great to me, right? And that is an example of some of the innovative ideas that we need, where we're kind of working together. So what more can we be doing as a board to help encourage that and facilitate that more often?
In my humble opinion, education. The more you could be educated on the differences and the unique opportunities, challenges of each of the service boards, the better you can facilitate conversations. And this is what Leanne works with us on all the time. But even as a board, there's just a lot of, I'm not going to say deep in the weeds stuff, but understanding how each of the different service boards has a little bit different demographic, a little bit different challenge, and certainly we have to share the same funding. So I think just kind of getting more education on whatever that looks like. Certainly, once again, you're invited to come out to 49th Street to see a piece of how we do what we do, and that's just a bit of our story. But I think that's the best thing this board could do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know there are other board members that have questions as well, so I'll hold.
Okay, thank you, Director Canty. Next up, we have Director Fraga. If you will lower your hand and unmute, and we'd like to hear from you now.
I'd like to thank all the service boards for their effort and reductions in expenses and not just asking for more funds. It's wonderful to see the reduction effort. It should show some responsibility to the average citizen for some of the efforts taken. I really just want to express my, let's say, condolence and my enthusiastic response to the service boards that for what they proposed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Frega. You can remute yourself. And next we have Director Colson, if you would lower your hand and unmute.
The Metro budget proposes reducing expenses by 155 million. Is that based on the assumption that these reduced alternate schedules that you're running will continue throughout the year?
They include well, like I said, about a dozen trains that we can add right now. And then I think it's, once again, I keep using the chicken and the egg thing, but as ridership comes in and more fare revenues come in than projected, then we can continue to add more service levels. We're going to continually look at data. We're building data machines here basically to help us make very important decisions moving forward that we've never had to make before. We're using a lot of analytics.
Okay, and then I have to ask these questions. Do you have any present plans to either borrow money in the near term or transfer capital funding to operating?
Both great questions, both questions that come up all the time. I could tell you from our board's perspective, they have no intent to borrow money in the near term to supplement operating. There's always a conversation about Metro taking out its first ever loan, borrowing. I believe our board has clearly explained to us that that would be only in a long-term capital investment. And as far as moving capital operating, that's certainly something we do not want to do, but we understand at the end of the day, as we're running 55, 56, 57% of ridership, going anything below that is really going to decimate the system. So if we get to that point late in 21, I know that's an option on the table. Our goal will be clearly to continue to cut expenses internally before we ever have to tap into capital.
Okay, and I ride Metro into the city maybe once a week, and I must tell you, it is a very safe and smooth ride, and you're doing a lot right. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to, if Director Colson will lower your hand, please.
Yes.
I'm going to take another quick scan through our list of participants here, and I see no other board members with their hands raised. So Chairman Dillard, if you've got anything you want to say?
No, other than thank you. You know, as a regular Metro rider, I appreciate, we have some new board members, Jim, and one of the things, I thought I knew everything about Metro because I had ridden you for 30 plus years, but the complexity of what you deal with on a daily basis is mind-boggling. And you're so good at being able to tell lay people like myself and us about what you're facing. And it's daunting. You do a great job, and we thank you for your leadership. And continue to innovate. And you and I have had lots of conversations. This is for my board that mass transit will not be the same. Even once we get a vaccine and go back to what we used to think was healthy normal, we need to use this opportunity to innovate and to improve. And since you're doing a very, very good job at this under the most difficult circumstances. So I thank you, and I look forward to working with your new board chairwoman, and it'll be a great partnership. So thank you so much. And again, to my board, if you haven't had the opportunity to go see their, what I call the old Rock Island maintenance facility off of the Dan Ryan, you should go see that and see not only how exceptional our mechanics are, but how much money, literally millions of dollars, Metro saves us using union labor in Illinois to refurbish our rolling stock. So go see it if you haven't seen it. Jim, thank you very much.
Okay, excuse me,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Director Lewis
Yes.
has raised his hand now, and if Director
Yeah.
Colson, if you could put yourself on mute.
Michael, good morning.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. First of all, excellent presentation. I just have one quick question. I didn't want to be too redundant, but you touched on it a little bit. Of the three service boards, probably Metro has the greatest component of non-essential workers in terms of, when I say non-essential, ones that can work from home, that would be less dependent upon the public transportation, if you will, because they can work from home. So you are doing analytics, which you alluded to really determine when the right time is, because the variables you have are expense reduction, investment in future transportation needs, and then finally trying to figure out when revenues are going to come back from increased demand from a passenger perspective. So the question is, how frequently are those analytics being done? And when do you begin to have a chance to pull the trigger on either I need to invest more in additional rider or capacity, or I need to cut back based on what I'm seeing in the analytics, so that you can be responsive, capitalize on opportunities, but not necessarily invest in expenses that are not going to be utilized fully by demand. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so my CFO, Tom Farmer, is on, and just now we're starting to build. He is the architect of these analytics. We've sat down in the past and talked about the fact that we reduced service down to 55%. We strategically put some trains on, trying to attract ridership back, somewhat successful in some areas. In some other areas, all they did is move people from one train to another train. So the analytics that we're putting together take everything into consideration, from are we adding a crew cost? What is the fuel cost? What is the turn time? How long does that train lay up now? Can we get to the cleaning? Also the passenger revenue component of it. We recently also hired a company on a short-term project that's analyzing the entire Chicago Union Station area. It's going to look at every single train pre-COVID that comes in, goes out of Union Station. That's the Heritage, Southwest Service, Burlington Northern, Amtrak, Milwaukee North, Milwaukee West, and an NCS. And what it's doing with that, it's taking the old schedules and it's going to start laying in there every single cost factor that's involved, where trains meet, opportunities, and a lot of this has to do with the union contracts and how we can actually get so that the crews are utilized for the maximum ability inside the contract, not overworking them or changing any of the variables that have to happen, but really looking at how can we come out of this being much more efficient than we were going into this. So there's many components to the analytics, and once again, we don't have that completely vetted yet. We knew going into 21 we were going to need decision-making tools, and Tom Farmer, our CFO, took that on and is now building those analytics for us. Shortly in the beginning of the year, all the data feeds will start coming in and it'll hopefully start crystallizing. And I'm sure we're going to have to adapt and adjust based on parameters we haven't even thought about yet.
Thank you.
Okay, let's try one more. One more scroll before we move on. And there are no other board hands raised, so I believe it's time to move on to the RTA's portion with B.
Hello, everyone. Again, this is B. Rena Hickey. So a couple of things. Once again, thank you to Jeremy, Dominic, and Tom Farmer for all of your hard work and your support during this challenging budget year. I also wanted to address one of the chairman's questions that you raised, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to Bill and Alex to pull this together very quickly on what the state cuts have cost us since their inception. Very quickly, the sales tax, if you call it an administrative fee or a surcharge, started in May of 2017 at 2%. The reduced fare, it was reduced to 1.5% in 2018. And then the public transportation fund started in 2017 also at 10%, and that was reduced to 5% in 2018. But here's the huge number. It has cost us to date about $143 million. And most of that impacts the CTA. So it's running, a little less than 50 million a year, but it varied from year to year because it started out higher. That is completely impacting our operating funding. So I just wanted to raise that since you did bring that up. So today I'm going to present an overview of the proposed 2021 RTA agency budget. The item is presented for discussion purposes only. No action is being requested at this time. On December 17th, the board will consider the 2021 RTA agency budget for adoption as part of the proposed 2021 RTA consolidated regional budget and capital program. Next slide, please. The proposed 2021 RTA agency operating budget continues to focus on the three-step recovery strategy in order to proactively respond to the financial and social crisis caused by the pandemic and prepare for the potential challenges ahead. The RTA is focused on the following policy priorities for near and longer-term recovery planning: identify immediate funding solutions, sustain critical transit service, and take an increasingly transparent, collaborative approach to communicating with stakeholders and the public. The proposed 2021 RTA agency operating budget contains a gross expense level of $38.1 million, a decrease of $3.8 million or 9% from the RTA's pre-COVID 2021 plan. The May 2020 RTA funding amendment reduced the amount of sales tax available for RTA requirements. In response, $3.5 million of agency budget savings were identified, and a revised 2020 agency budget was adopted in August 2020. The amended 2020 agency budget was funded at $31.7 million, a reduction of 10% from the original 2020 budget. The proposed 2021 agency budget has zero growth as it maintains this $31.7 million funding level. This was achieved for the 2021 budget in part by using prior year positive budget variances to fund contractually obligated regional program costs. Next slide, please. In 2021, budgeted funding and revenues totaled $38.1 million, as shown on the left. Of that amount, 50% or $19 million represents regional public funding from the RTA sales tax. To offset lower regional sales tax receipts, the 2021 budget utilizes $12.7 million of CARES Act funding, which comprises 33.3% of total revenues. The remaining 16.7% or $6.4 million includes grants and other revenue. Budgeted agency expenses also total $38.1 million, as shown on the right. The proposed RTA agency budget is developed in two parts: administration and regional programs. Administrative costs account for 42.3% or $16.1 million, which is more than 40% below the 2021 $29 million statutory administrative cap allowed by the RTA Act. The administrative budget includes expenses for personnel, professional services, information technology, facilities, and other office services that support the funding, planning, and oversight mission of the RTA. The proposed regional programs budget accounts for the remaining 7.7 or $22 million of the 2021 agency expenses. Regional programs include regional services and grant and RTA funded projects. Regional services account for 39.5% or $15 million. The proposed 2021 regional services budget supports services provided to the public, including ADA paratransit certification, mobility management, and travel training. The RTA Customer Service Centers, free and reduced fare programs, and the RTA Transit Benefit Program. RTA's grant-funded projects and RTA-funded regional studies and initiatives include the interagency signage maintenance, Rebuild Illinois project management oversight, community planning assistance, and 5310 federally funded programs. These projects account for the remaining 18.2% or $6.9 million. For many of these projects, the RTA acts as an advocate and granting agency, receiving funds for the regions and then administering it to the service boards, municipalities, and counties for planning projects. Next slide, please. This chart depicts the portion of the agency budget supported by regional funding from the RTA sales tax. We also call this the net operating budget because it reflects expenses less associated revenue and outside funding. Here we compare the 2021 administrative and regional programs proposed budgets to the 2020 budget. The 2021 administrative budget is 7.4% lower than the 2020 budget due to lower personnel expenses as a result of lower budgeted headcount. Total agency headcount is budgeted at 105 positions, 2 fewer positions than in 2020. In addition, the total professional services line is 36% lower than the 2020 budget and with expected savings in legal fees, legislative consulting, PMO, and IT consulting services. The 2021 regional programs budget decreased by 12.5% or 2.2 million due to overall regional services expenses and fewer budgeted regional projects. Thus, the total proposed 2021 RTA agency net operating budget of 31.7 million is expected to decrease by 10% or 3.5 million from the 2020 budget. Next slide, please. The RTA is meeting its DBE participation goal for federally funded contracts of 16%, and we exceeded the goal by 3% in federal fiscal year 2019. Which ended September 30th, 2019. Additionally, we met the RTA DBE participation goal of 12% on non-federally funded contracts in 2019 and 2020. RTA's efforts to grow the agency's DBE programs have continued despite the COVID-19 pandemic. In-person outreach events and government procurement compliance or GPC forums were held until mid-March of 2020. Starting in April, the monthly GPC forums have been held virtually via WebEx and Zoom. Vendor fairs and pre-bid meetings have also gone virtual. This concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, B. Any questions of the board on our own budget?
I am scrolling. I see one, Director Canty. If you would lower your hand, please. Thank you.
I just, and Leanne and Jill and Jeremy and others, I appreciate all the, and B, I appreciate all the work that you guys have put into all of this program, but I would echo my comments from earlier and really push us to be as innovative as we can across the board as we're looking forward. And to work with the service boards as much as possible to try and create the changes that we want and need to see in the event that we do have to make some really tough choices. So that urging that I gave to the service boards to, be as innovative as possible, I put on to you all as well. And thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
Okay. If you would lower your hand, and Director Groven, if you would lower your hand and unmute.
Thanks. I'll very briefly echo what all the other directors have said. Fantastic presentations this morning. Obviously, we sit more distant from the riding public than do all of our friends and peers at the service boards, but we even from a distance feel real pride in what's happening as far as the maintaining services and the frontline work that's being done. So thank you for the presentations. Thank you for that ongoing work. I just kind of wanted to build on what Mary Beth was saying about envisioning new future. There's been some really good work done, I think, in the RTA around this scenario planning. And the recurring theme across all of the presentations today was just the incredible level of uncertainty that we have today. And one of the tools that is available to us, it doesn't give us clarity, but it does allow us to better navigate through this uncertainty, is the scenario planning. So, we've heard also that each of the boards has some good analytical resources. And I guess what I would just ask is that if it's not already happening, I think there's a real opportunity here for us as a region to get our best view, not the future, we can't predict the future, but potential futures, potential scenarios that would allow us, especially with the cross-functional view from all the different demographics, all the different kind of operating models that are represented here, as to what might be some potential outcomes and therefore start to get a little more certainty as to our path forward. So I guess the request is, if it's not happening already, some collaboration, I think, on the scenario planning could really be powerful with the resources that we have available across the region. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Director Groven. I'm taking another look here. I see no additional hands raised, so Chairman Dillard, I will turn things back to you.
Thank you. And again, thanks to the board and to the three service boards. Just one last closing comment before we go on to the resolution certifying the financial results for the third quarter is that Leanne and our staff, Dorval, and the service boards, but especially Leanne and Dorval, are very, very active with the American Public Transportation Association. And and as I said at the onset of the meeting, having Phil Washington, our counterpart in Los Angeles, a Chicago native, in charge of the transportation portion of President-elect Biden's transition team is a good signal. But Leanne and Dorval and Jim and Rocky and all of us, there's nothing against plagiarizing good ideas or taking or piggybacking good ideas from other large city systems or from Europe as that goes. So we're always looking when it comes to innovation, how are we going to change the status quo? I just want our board to understand we're looking at what everybody else worldwide is doing as well in the changing face that we're going to see coming forward in mass transportation worldwide. So with that, let's go on to 7A, which is the resolution certifying the financial results for the third quarter. And once again, I'll call on B. Raina Hickey. B, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, but our Manager of Budget and Operations, Doug Anderson, will be presenting this.
Super. Thanks, Doug.
And good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is Doug Anderson, Manager of Budgets and Analysis here at the RTA. Today, I'm presenting the year-to-date financial results through the third quarter of 2020, which are subject to board certification. As directed by the September 2020 RTA funding amendment, the service boards each submitted revised 2020 financial estimates on October 16th, which will provide the basis for a third 2020 regional budget amendment to be considered for adoption by the RTA board in December. However, today we are comparing the service board's actual third quarter financial results to the current RTA adopted budgets submitted by CTA, Metra, and Pace Suburban Service in August and submitted for ADA Paratransit last month. At the end of the presentation, I will be recommending that the board certify that the results of operations of each service board and the region as a whole are in substantial accordance with the amended budget established on October 15th, 2020. If we were to instead use the more recent 2020 estimates of the service boards as the budget for certification, the recommendation of substantial accordance would be the same. Next slide, please. The service boards are beginning to run into a constraint with respect to CARES Act requisitions, which is impacting operating revenue results, as you can see by the unfavorable red variances on this slide. Because CARES Act funding may only be used to bring financial results to a break-even condition, and the service boards have been good stewards of the CARES Act monies by reducing their expenses, which we'll show in a minute. This is actually working against them and limiting the amount of CARES Act funding they can requisition for fair revenue replacement. It's not enough to cause a problem with the overall third quarter results, but it could create a substantial accordance issue as we approach year end, and we'll keep the board informed on that situation. Total operating revenue of $814.7 million was $43.1 million, or 5% unfavorable to budget through the third quarter. With the exception of Metra, ridership has actually been a little stronger than anticipated in the revised budgets. Metra has stated that they now expect ridership to finish 2020 at less than 20% of normal, whereas their August budget amendment assumed they might finish the year at 30% of normal, contributing to the 6.5% unfavorable variance shown here. Fortunately, for CTA, Metra, and Pace, favorable expense performance is more than offsetting these red revenue variances. Next slide, please. And here is that good expense performance. System-wide operating expenses through September were $90.9 million, or 4.4% favorable to budget, despite increased cleaning costs related to the pandemic. Each service board had favorable results, with Metra and Pace Suburban Service savings driven by reduced service levels. ADA Paratransit's overall expenses were $2.6 million, unfavorable to budget through the third quarter as ridership has begun to exceed the revised budget adopted just last month. Next slide, please. Focusing on the certification of year-to-date financial results through the third quarter, this slide displays the variances of each service board's operating deficit from budget. Operating deficit is simply operating revenue minus operating expense. So this is where the expense performance is offsetting the unfavorable revenue performance. CTA's operating deficit was essentially at budget, while Metra and Pace Suburban Service reported significantly favorable variances. The combined regional operating deficit was $47.7 million, or 3.9% favorable to budget. Next slide, please. With $412.2 million of CARES Act funding included in operating revenue, the regional recovery ratio has improved to 50.4% through September, now 0.3 percentage points above budget. Each service board's recovery ratio variance was within acceptable levels. As you can see on the left side of the table, in the absence of CARES Act funding, recovery ratios would be less than 30%. Accordingly, staff recommends that the results of operations of each service board and the region taken as a whole through the third quarter be found in substantial accordance with the currently adopted budget. That concludes my remarks. I'll try my best to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Any questions of Doug?
I am scrolling. I do not see any hands raised.
Then, can I have a motion in a second?
Director Carey moves and Director Groven seconds.
Thank you. Madam Chair, why don't you take the roll, please?
Okay. Director Andalcio?
Yes.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Yes.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin? Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
We have 16 ayes.
Thank you, and it will be so reported, and that is approved. Next is 7B, which is the expense reimbursement as submitted to the board. Are there any questions or comments on this? If not, can I have a motion and a second?
I see Director Ross's hand raised. I don't know if you have a question or if you are making the motion. Director Ross?
Making the motion.
Thank you. And Director Cotel is seconding.
Thank you. If there's no comments, Audrey, you want to take the roll call on this one as well, please?
Certainly. Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Aye.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Yes.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you, and that will be so reported. Item 8 is new business. Anybody have any new business for discussion only this afternoon?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, great. Leanne, you have anything else you'd like to add? Before Leanne speaks, when I mentioned the APTA and how we follow what happens worldwide with other transit agencies, both Leanne and Dorval hold elected positions, high-level positions within APTA. And many of the cities, most of the cities look to us, meaning Chicago, for innovation and leadership. So our peers nationwide probably steal more ideas from us than we take from them. But collaboration is what it takes, and we are in constant communication with our national peers, which is healthy because we're all in this together, whether it's London, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, or Chicago, or Washington, D.C., their metro system as well. Ann, you have anything else to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you and the board for your time today and your thorough preparation and work and questions. I think it led to a good discussion. Hopefully this will culminate in next month's meeting. Like I mentioned earlier, where we will hopefully pass the budget. I mentioned earlier too, Audrey will send you some more information about the public hearing that'll come up on December 3rd. So I'm hoping we can get some board member participation in that as well. So that's really it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our staff. We every day depend on you, and you go over and above to make us look good and to give us information that's critical to our region. As Leanne said, if you're able to attend that December 3rd meeting, it's always good to hear from the public, and it's an interesting meeting. But our regular meeting, our next regular meeting of the RTA board, the full board, is Thursday, December 17th, beginning at 9. And again, depending upon the situation of COVID, we'll see whether we're virtual or whether there's a location. My guess is we'll still be virtual. But everyone have a safe and, most importantly, healthy Thanksgiving. Thank you for everything that you do. And if there's no further business to come before us, I'll have a motion and a second to adjourn.
Director Canty makes the motion. And let's see. And Director Gathing seconds.
Thank you. All those in favor, you can leave the meeting. Let's put it that way. It is adopted, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.